Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto and Hinata helps each other in training for Genin exam part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. I'm leaving the village tonight. The older shinobi paused in the review of his notes to look up at the sound of a voice he'd become so familiar with. Standing there in shadow, near the only window of the room he'd rented for the night, was his student. He had forgotten just how well versed at slipping in and out of places his student had become, and was surprised that he hadn't noticed his entry to the room until the moment the young man had spoken. Setting his notes aside with a deep sigh, he quickly assessed the young shinobi. Just what do you mean by leaving the village? I'm certain you wouldn't sneak into my room in the middle of the night simply to inform me of your latest mission. So? He waited for the young man to confirm what he already knew. The shinobi standing in shadow moved forward so the light of the lone lamp could reveal his battle-weary form, in his all-too-familiar orange jumpsuit. Naruto Uzumaki, a typically jovial, if often immature young man, now stood before Jiraiya with an expression on his face that could only be described as bitter and closed off. You know what I mean, Jiraiya-sama. Even the sound of his voice was now cold and detached, 2 words no one would ever imagine using to describe the young man before him. However, if you truly need me to spell it out for you, Jiraiya's eyes followed the sight of the blue headband that once rested proudly upon the boy's brow as it clattered onto the table before him. Why? Was the only response the Toad Sage felt necessary at the moment. He clasped the discarded forehead protector in his fist, studying the article before returning his gaze to the face of his student. This was a side of Naruto that Jiraiya was unfamiliar with and was equally unsure of how to handle him. I can't remain in this village. Correction. I won't remain in this village. A person can only take being told they are something so many times before they start to believe it, Naruto said with a vicious snarl. The Toad Sage chose to overlook the hate in Naruto's tone. You know what consequences a choice such as this will bring, Jiraiya spoke in a low tone. He sat quietly for only a second before inquiring, Are you sure you are making the right decision? Naruto's eyes narrowed as he replied, It is the decision I will stand by. Jiraiya seemed to wave the boy's statement away as inconsequential with his response, Yes, your Nindo. Though I believe you misunderstood me, I meant, are you sure you're making the right decision in telling me this? His eyes took on a hard glint as he stared down the 13-year-old before him. Naruto raised his head in defiance. I think so, yes. If I told Kakashi-sensei, he would immediately report me to Tsunade-sama, while I believe you would not. Jiraiya seemed to consider Naruto's statements, deciding whether or not the boy's trust was well placed before responding. I will give you 5 days, a week at most, before I tell her about this conversation. You will become a missing nin, and you will be hunted, this you well know. With a sigh he continued, If you need me, send word through the toads. Naruto ruefully shook his head. If I need you, I'll be dead before I could send such a message. Jiraiya's head jerked backwards as though struck as he continued to stare at the young man before him, wondering what could have occurred that would bring him to such a low point in his life. Before another word could be shared between the two, Naruto stepped back into the shadows of the room, disappearing out the window. A saddened sigh seemed to fill the room as Jiraiya visibly deflated. He knew whatever had occurred was something Naruto would carry with him always. Especially if it was an event so terrible it could drive the jubilant blonde, who dreamed of becoming Hokage, to the life of a missing nin. He had seen a coldness within Naruto that had never been present before, a coldness that he hoped wouldn't consume the young man. Jiraiya knew better than anyone that Naruto was far more capable as a shinobi than what everyone perceived, what he led everyone to perceive. Turning away from the window to stare at the long forehead protector, he hoped that the worst wouldn't come to pass, that Naruto would not be captured as a missing nin. Though he himself held an unwavering loyalty to Konohagakure, he didn't wish to see the boy punished for seeking a life outside of the village. 8 years later. She'd been abducted, again. Hinata Hyuga awoke knowing she was no longer lying in the comfortable bed of the high-priced room her father had arranged for her at the inn within Sunagakure. Her first clue was the distinct lack of a bed beneath her, the second and third was the eclipsing darkness and smell of earth that surrounded her. She knew her kunoichi skills were rusty, but how was it possible for her to have been abducted out of bed so easily? Silently activating her Byakugan, she searched the area, finding herself in what appeared to be a dome room, with no door or windows, alone. Attempting to sit up, she discovered how it was possible for her to be abducted out of bed. Her body felt weighed down, and her head ached with the remnants of a drug. Probably a drug saban, she thought as she was finally able to lift her body into an upright position. Bastards! How many times will I awaken to discover I've been abducted in my life? She was unsure if she should be relieved to discover she was still dressed in the nightgown she'd donned before bed. It didn't exactly provide a cover of modesty, It's not like she could have planned to wear something more suitable for the role of kidnapped victim. Hinata hated this aspect of life as a Hyuga. She hated even more the fact that 8 years ago she had allowed her father to pressure her into leaving the life of a kunoichi. If she hadn't, perhaps she would have been more capable of avoiding a situation like this. But that was an issue for another day, not today when she needed to focus instead of being distracted by what-ifs. I may not have prevented this from happening, but I will save myself. Her frustration over the situation mounted as she dragged herself over to the nearest wall to rest while waiting for the last of the drug to wear off. The wall was made of earth, and as she focused harder on what her eyes could discern, she realized she was within a network of cave systems. More specifically, inside one of the caves within the system, and as far as her gifted eyes could tell, there was no way out. How did they get me in here? Focusing beyond her cave, she was able to locate 2 men 150 feet away approaching at a sedate pace. Judging by the direction they were traveling, she knew they would approach the opposite side of the cave from where she sat, if they didn't pass her by completely. Please, let them pass me by, she thought as her body protested her struggles to stand. She nearly fell over as she was hit with a wave of dizziness. Throwing one arm out to catch herself on the wall, Hinata paused to let the feeling fade before attempting to walk. Watching the two approaching figures closely to calculate how much time she'd have, Hinata began walking towards the opposite side of the cave. It was neither an easy nor quick process, and she found herself giving thanks that the abductors appeared to be in no rush. Reaching the opposite side of the cave, she quickly began to slide her fingers over the wall, hoping to find something her eyes could not see, a way out. She'd only had enough time to realize she was truly sealed in before she heard a loud rumbling. Bits of rock began to fall around her as a section of the wall 4 feet away began to slowly shift to the side. Of course, an Earth-style user, she thought to herself as she deactivated her Byakugan, tuned into the men's conversation, and waited for the perfect time to strike. You know, they only want her eyes, and there are a lot of things we could do to her that won't involve her eyes one bit, said one of the men lecherously as the section of wall continued to shift. I mean, did you see that body? I can't wait to have a little fun with that. Hinata felt her rage increase at the thought of what these men were after, not only her eyes, but the use of her body as well. She would not be at the mercy of these men, she'd rather die before letting one of them touch her. Gora, I don't think we should mess with her yet. At least not until we are in a more secure location, the report from June said. Ronin is tracking us. Hinata could see light entering the cave from a flashlight one of them was carrying. She pressed as close to the wall as possible, while waiting for them both to enter the opening. Daichi, you worry too much. Ronin tracking us? Ha, the guy doesn't exist, the one going by, Gora proclaimed as he entered the cave and began to sweep the flashlight around the open space. He was a tall and pudgy man whose appearance was enough to nearly make Hinata gag. Hey, where the hell is she? The other man quickly approached his side. This one was short and bedraggled, looking the perfect opposite to Gora. There's no way she could have gotten out. The dossier said she was a weak former kunoichi with no earth affinity. Hinata finally made her move, palm heel strike. She struck Gora between his shoulder blades before bringing her leg up to kick him into his partner, as hard as possible. Without checking to see the effects of her actions, she turned to run out of the cave. Her Byakugan had provided the layout of the network of caves, and she was certain she could find her way out. That was until she was tripped by one of the men, a trained kunoichi. Formerly, she easily shifted into a roll that allowed her to continue her forward momentum. Her luck ran out as she heard, "Sway-tun, sway-ben." A whip made out of water circled her neck tightly, lifting her off of her feet only to slam hard onto her back. The whip continued to tighten as she struggled not only to remove the coil around her neck but to keep from being dragged back to the men. Her vision began to blur as she desperately kicked out, unable to breath. As the men approached while maintaining the tautness of the whip on her neck, she viciously attempted to kick any body part not belonging to her that she could reach. Her vision began to dim, and her struggles began to slow, as Daichi approached to deliver a bone-shattering blow to the left side of her face. She was fading quickly as she felt the cave shudder and heard a blast. Jerking away from the woman slightly, both men seemed surprised and yet terrified at the possibilities of what could be occurring. Daichi whispered one word in fear, "Ronin?" Suddenly the water whip loosened around her neck, and she gasped desperately for air. Gora grabbed a fistful of her hair, dragging her back into the cave before resealing her in with a "Dotan, Doria Hiki." She was so weak and all she could do was lay there and cough as she desperately attempted to get her throat to work properly. The lack of oxygen had done nothing for her recovering. Previously drugged body, she hadn't felt so battered in years. I really need to start training again, this is pathetic, she thought to herself. I can't even escape from those two. Rocks began to rain down on and around her as the earth of the cave continued to sporadically rumble and quake. She knew without activating her Byakugan that her abductors were under attack. Unless someone out there is a Hyuga, they'll never know I'm here. Not much of a rescue, but at least I won't die having suffered the advances of those two, she shuddered thinking of what could have happened. The cave began to tremble more violently as she began to fear it would collapse on her and become her tomb. Please, let it be quick, she prayed as she struggled to once again stand. The wall of the cave began to shift again, and Hinata attempted to slip into her old fighting stance, prepared for the worst. Goro rushed in, and she noted he was trembling in terror. He was clearly prepared for any attack on her part as he performed a seal saying, Doton, rock bullet jutsu. A large rock slammed into Hinata, throwing her into the wall behind her as her recently regained breath was forced from her lungs. Collapsing to her hands and knees, she found herself once again struggling for air as Goro approached her. He gripped a handful of her hair again, attempting to drag her from the room. Get up, you bitch, he growled. Get up. He's after you, so you'll be my ticket out of here. Before he could move her another foot, a shadow fell over them. Goro released her hair to spin abruptly towards the entrance of the cavern. Hinata finally drew in a deep breath as she looked from her position on the floor to see the most terrifying sight ever. Standing in the entrance to the cave was Ronin, the most wanted man in all of the allied nations. Though she'd never laid eyes on this man, she knew him by his renowned appearance. The trademark red pants and shirt that was such a deep red it was said the man could be covered in blood and no one would ever know. The dark, blacker than night, coat that he wore with the black mask covering his face from his neck to just below the coldest set of blue eyes she had ever seen. There was no way it could be anyone else, and clearly Goro knew it too as he tried to bolster some bravado in the face of the well-known and most skilled killer ever to be born. Goro performed a seal, Doton, Doriyuso, was all Hinata heard before a sharp spear of earth rose up from the ground to impale itself through her left shoulder. She screamed out in pain as she felt the spear enter her shoulder only to exit the other side. She tried to contain her sounds of pain and focus on breaking the spear to free herself as Goro had successfully pinned her in place. Ronin's eyes had never left Goro's face. He hadn't even reacted to the woman being impaled. It was as though she didn't even exist. His focus was solely on her abductor. Goro attempted to bluff his way out of the situation. I'm not afraid of you. He spat at the lone man who hadn't moved a single step into the cavern. Ronin's hands hung loosely at his sides, covered in fingerless black gloves. He seemed to be almost made of stone as there was no visible movement on his part. Goro lifted his hands to perform another seal as Hinata suddenly felt a rush of air, at the same time something warm and wet splattered her right side. Glancing up with tears in her eyes, Hinata saw Ronin standing to the side of Goro, whose neck now had a kunai through it. The look in Ronin's eyes hadn't changed from the cold and almost boring expression she'd seen when he first appeared at the entrance of the cave. Giving a twist to the kunai, Ronin jerked it out of Goro's neck as the dead man fell over Hinata's legs. She struggled to remove the weight and free herself from the earth's spear without taking her eyes off of the intimidating figure standing over her. He knelt down, assessing her in a calculating manner before reaching out with one hand and easily crumbling the spear that had so successfully trapped her. She attempted to scramble away from him, fearing he was there to kill her, as Goro had exclaimed that someone was here for her. Ronin merely stood, pulling her uninjured arm over his shoulder before scooping her struggling form into his arms, then striding out of the cavern. He turned right, heading down an open tunnel. Hinata ceased struggling and began to wonder if this notorious killer could possibly be rescuing her. The cave began to quake violently as even more rocks and dirt began to fall than during the attack. They turned a corner to find another man dressed all in black. We need to hurry. You killed the Earth-style user, didn't you? Of course you did. The network of caves is collapsing. It was his jutsu that created them, and now that he's dead. Well, I'm sure you can guess what's beginning to happen. Hey, nice piece of ass you've scooped up. Hinata was shocked that this man was speaking so casually to the known killer, as the cave literally collapsed around them with large chunks of earth falling mere feet away from them. Ronin, without jostling Hinata at all, reached out to hit the other man upside his head and point towards the direction of the exit. The other man merely nodded before running towards the exit. Ronin placed his arm under her again before pulling her in tightly and beginning to follow his partner. Despite the fact that he was running with portions of earth practically landing on them, Hinata was never once jostled. He was careful to keep her secure and protected in his arms. Even when a large boulder forced him to stumble hard into the wall, he turned to ensure his body took the brunt of the impact. Despite the danger around her, she found herself confused over the situation she seemed to be in the middle of. Rushing out of the caverns as it finally collapsed in on itself, Hinata had to squeeze her eyes shut tightly as they adjusted to the bright light of the afternoon sun. Ronin moved to set her down near a tree as his partner approached. Hinata eyed both of the men warily, not trusting they wouldn't kill her or worse, rape her. Ronin reached out to tear the material of her nightgown away from her wounded shoulder as Hinata swung her right palm forward, intending to land a hit on the tenketsu points in his forearm while simultaneously deflecting a potential hit. Before she could make contact, he caught her wrist, holding it away from him. Relax, he growled in a low voice. I'm checking the wound. Unless you want it to continue bleeding, he questioned her. Hinata froze. It was too much for her to comprehend that perhaps he truly did mean to provide aid to her. Hey lady, If you aren't dead already, then he's not going to kill you. Just settle down and let us do what we can for that shoulder. Ronan's partner caught her attention from 2 feet behind him. Attempting to watch the both of them, she gave a subtle nod that she would settle down as had been suggested. Ronan quickly released her wrist and continued in his original attempt to tear the material away from her should and assess the wound. She gasped in pain as he probed the wound before tearing material from the bottom of her gown to wrap around her shoulder. "She'll live," was all the infamous assassin said before turning away from her. Watching the masked man move away from her, Hinata was still unable to relax. She was just rescued by Ronan. That thought alone astounded her. The rumors surrounding his name stated that no one who went against him survived. As far as she knew, he also never saved anyone before. So why did he save me? She shifted to place her body as close to the tree as possible, tucking one foot under her while drawing the knee of the opposite leg close to her torso. She did this in case the need arose to stand quickly, not that she truly felt capable of moving quickly in her current state. Details that she'd overlooked before stood out starkly. Of course, those details had been unimportant when her main focus was escape and survival. Adrenaline was a funny thing like that. It could increase one's strength and speed in times of danger, but had the nasty habit of blocking out necessary details. As the adrenaline rush faded, the fact that nearly every part of her body ached and the dizziness she awoke with had only gotten worse was very clear. Will there ever come a time today when I am not dizzy? Shifting her eyes back to her shoulder to note that the material of her gown was quickly becoming soaked in blood, she knew the answer to her question. Glancing down, she saw that the pale cream-colored gown she wore, which hadn't provided much cover before, was definitely failing to do so now. It had fallen to mid-thigh, but now that the material was torn to create a makeshift bandage, it barely covered her butt. Add the fact that the gown was sheer and, thanks to the hole in her left shoulder, covered in blood, the material now clung damply to her torso as well. Hinata shuddered at the source of the blood on her right side, a regrettable fact. She did not regret that Gora was dead or even the method of which that death had occurred. Instead, she regretted the fact that until she was able to change, she was forced to suffer the blood of that vile man on her body. She mentally shrugged thoughts of modesty and Gora's blood away as they were unimportant in comparison to the potential threat standing mere feet away. Keeping her head tilted down, Hinata raised her eyes in an attempt to watch both men covertly. She studied them, noting that Ronan was tall, possibly 6 foot. He would seem to tower over her diminutive height of 5 foot 3 inches. This would give him greater reach in a fight between the two, meaning she would have to be careful to stay out of that range or move quickly enough to land her blows before retreating a safe distance. He was clearly well-muscled, a fact she'd become aware of as he'd carried her. Of course, she'd immediately noted his blue eyes resting above his mask. It was something no one could miss, for those eyes were cold and detached, promising death to any who dared to look upon them. What she hadn't noted before was that the man had blonde hair reaching just past the collar of his jacket, though sections of it stood up at odd angles as though trying to escape his head any way possible. She wondered if this assassin wore a mask because his face was hideous, thus giving her the answer as to why his hair would wish to escape his head. If that was the case, then she felt it would be a shame to waste a body like his on a hideous face. Who cares what his face looks like? It certainly won't matter when he decides to kill me. He could be buck-toothed or covered in warts, and it wouldn't matter. She tried to stem her curiosity over the appearance of a man she should hate. She was unable to garner any other useful information, as the mask and heavy coat he wore revealed little. She despised hired assassins, men with no moral code, whose ethics swayed depending upon the amount of money they were paid. Yet she couldn't dredge much hate for the man who had saved her life. She had to admit, from what she could discern, he had a body to die for, literally. But who was he? That was the 100 million real question. Oh yes, the man before her had accumulated a hefty bounty in the bingo book. Even the slightest information regarding his identity could gain someone a small fortune. She could understand why he would be determined to keep his identity secret, though she couldn't help but find herself curious about him. Shifting her gaze to his partner, she was able to garner necessary details about the more talkative man, as he appeared unconcerned with keeping his identity secret. Hinata noted that he was several inches shorter than Ronan, putting him around 5 foot 6 or 7 inches. She wouldn't have to worry too much about his reach in a fight, as the difference in height between them wasn't that great. He also possessed a smaller, though muscular, frame than his legendary partner. In fact, he seemed to be almost an opposite of Ronan, with brown hair that barely reached his collar, though notably more subdued than his partner's, and dark brown eyes. He wore all black and, unlike his partner, no jacket. Hinata continued to watch them as she began to feel the effects of blood loss rushing over her. She needed to stay alert but was having difficulty. The two men stood 5 feet away from her, and yet she couldn't tell what they were saying or even pick up the sound of their voices. Ronan stood like a statue with his left side towards her, perhaps to keep her in his peripheral at all times. He won't give his back to a potential threat, even in my condition, she noted. His arms hung loosely at his sides, though occasionally she noticed his fingers would flex as though preparing to form a fist. His partner seemed to be doing all of the talking, though it was hard to tell with the mask he wore. "They're probably debating on how to kill me," she drew a deep breath, preparing for any possibility. Ronan couldn't believe his poor luck. He knew going into this job that the kidnapped victim was a Hyuga, but did it have to be her? Upon seeing Hinata inside that cave, his chest had ached with memories of the past best forgotten. Too many years had passed, and he was a different man now. He'd become so cold inside that even the emotion he felt upon seeing her again was fleeting before shifting into his usual state of calm detachment. Despite that detachment, it had been difficult not to react when Goro had used his earth spear jutsu to pin her to the floor. After years of hearing various gasps and screams of pain or mercy in his profession, he had considered himself immune to such things. Yet he was unable to stand her cry of pain as the spear had struck her shoulder. Assessing her again as Takashi spoke in a babbling rant, a common occurrence, he felt anger attempt to stir inside him at the sight of her bruised and beaten body. She had always been gentle and soft-spoken, never one to be cruel to anyone, especially him, and the thought of her being put through so much abuse bothered him. Hinata didn't deserve to be treated in such a way. She should have been secure within the arms of her family, protected by the powerful Hyuga clan and their all-seeing eyes. He couldn't help but be curious as to how two idiots like Goro and Daichi had managed to kidnap her from her room in the middle of the night. "Yo, you listening to me?" Takashi snapped his fingers near Ronan's face. A gesture Hinata had clearly seen causing her to tense. She clearly expected a violent reaction from him. Turning to blankly stare Takashi down, he merely quirked an eyebrow as a signal that spoke volumes to the younger man. "Do you really think I am capable of being that oblivious? Do not do that again." Takashi merely shrugged, unconcerned over the nonverbal communication he'd clearly understood. "Look, I know we never back out of a job, but I say we've done our good deed. She's alive with her eyes still intact. Let's just leave her here." Takashi spoke in a low voice once again. Despite wearing a mask and maintaining a silent stoicism, most of the time, Takashi was still capable of picking up on every nuance of his moods and personality. It was a testament to their years together, and the friendship they'd developed. "I see the way you're looking at her, and this can only lead to trouble." Ronan usually tried to speak as little as possible during a job. He honestly felt no need to converse with people he planned to kill, or might kill in the future. But for obvious reasons he chose to make an exception on this one. "Get over there," was all he said while pointing in the direction of the Hyuga heiress. As always, his voice was low, and to his ears rough. After all, it had changed in more ways than one over the years. Ronan thought of the scar he bore across his neck. It was a consequence of a poor decision regarding a woman. One would think he'd have learned his lesson by now. Viciously forcing those thoughts to the back of his mind and slamming a door on them, he watched in mild humor, as Takashi gave an over-exaggerated sigh while turning to do as we was told. Before he could get within 3 feet of the gentle-looking creature, she sprung to her feet, poised to strike. Not wanting Takashi to hurt Hinata out of instinct born from his training, Ronan rushed between them and glared down at her. His intervention appeared unnecessary, however, as he watched her eyes roll to the back of her head before she fainted. Ronan was quick to catch her up into his arms before she could fall to the ground. Clearly the blood loss and her captor's drugs had taken a toll. Laying her down gently, he removed his coat to drape it over her. "Careful now, one might confuse you for a gentleman," Takashi's smart mouth interjected. "Shut up, before I decide I'm tired of your constant nagging. I swear you're worse than a woman," Ronan snapped back at him. With Hinata unconscious, he felt he could speak freely with Takashi. Yeah, was Takashi's only response. He moved forward quickly to grip the neck of Hinata's gown, only to have Ronan catch both hands by the wrist. Unfazed, he glanced up. "Oh, what are you doing?" Ronan knew that in order to properly dress the 1-inch in diameter hole going through the Hyuga's shoulder, her upper body would need to be stripped. After watching the amount of fear she displayed when Takashi approached, he actually felt some semblance of shame for not trying to alleviate that fear. "Give me the kit, I'll do it." "Hoping for a quick peek, boss? I know it's been a while since yo." Takashi's next words were cut off as Ronan swatted him upside the head again, hard. Without commenting or reacting, Takashi turned to draw the kit of medical supplies out of the pouch he carried at his lower back. "You knew her, didn't you? From before you left?" Ronan snatched the kit out of his hands to begin gathering the necessary ointments and bandages. Without lookup, he said, "Go scout the area." He hadn't wanted to go back down that road even with Takashi. Takashi's face hardened from jokester to the serious assassin. "Sometimes I don't know why I'm your friend, Naruto." With that, he rushed off to do as he'd been told. Left alone with the unconscious Hinata, he released a sigh, hoping that it would help calm him. Allowing someone to know his true identity was a mistake, a liability, but he couldn't regret the years he'd known Takashi. His partner knew the potential risk of being captured and tortured for information on him, but he didn't care. Naruto moved his jacket to just below her. The material of her gown clung to her body, providing an enticing sight to his eyes. He struggled to remain detached, knowing he'd have to remove the garment to treat her shoulder. Moving quickly, he tore the material away to reveal her. Oh, Cammy, they were perfect, creamy white and tipped with the palest pink. He squeezed his eyes shut as he felt his body hardening at the sight. Taking another deep breath, he opened his eyes, focusing on the bleeding hole in her shoulder. He cleaned as much of the blood from around the wound as possible before applying a topical ointment. Unfortunately, he had to endure the feeling of those perfect pressing into his forearm as he sat her up to apply the same treatment to the other side of the wound, on her back. His breathing was ragged by the time he began carefully applying pads of gauze to both sides of the wound and wrapped the bandage around her shoulder, then across her chest to keep the gauze in place. Once the bandage was complete, he struggled to move his jacket to slip her arms into it without revealing more of her body. The lower half of her gown was still wrapped around her hips, and that was where he intended to leave it. He did not need the additional thoughts such an image would bring him. Finally getting her body covered, he laid her back down gently before beginning to pace and wait for Takashi's return. Wandering over to the tree Hinata had previously rested against, he slipped his mask off, feeling that if he didn't he would surely suffocate. Running one hand across his face and over the back of his neck, he attempted to settle back into his typical calm, detached demeanor. The mask was back in place by the time Takashi returned, as he leaned against the tree in a mock stance of relaxation with his arms and feet crossed. "Well," he questioned. "There's no one around, but we should get moving. So let's wake her ass up." Naruto held out a hand to halt Takashi. "No, let her rest, I'll carry her to a safer location." "You're attracted to her?" It was more a statement than a question. "I'm not blind or dead yet," he said drily. "Can you honestly tell me you aren't attracted to her?" "No, I sure can't. I told you she's a hot piece of ass, one I wouldn't mind having under, over or in front of me for a few hours," Takashi replied, crossing his arms over his chest as Naruto growled at him. He pinned Naruto with a glare. "But I know you're never this gentle or considerate." He said those adjectives as though they were offensive to him in every way. "She's obviously beautiful, it's lust and nothing more. Trust me, it'll pass." He moved from the tree to pick up Hinata, careful to ensure his jacket continued to cover her. "You sure it will?" Takashi questioned, glancing pointedly between Naruto's face and the girl lying unconscious in his arms. "We're done here," he replied, turning to leap into the trees so they could get out of the area and to a safer location. Holding her in his arms again was distracting. He didn't remember her being so small, but then he hadn't been much taller than her before he'd left the village. He felt as though he could easily crush her in his arms now if he wasn't careful. Naruto began to allow memories of his time in the village to surface, something usually avoided. Back then he'd always considered her pretty and full of grace. Her gentle nature had always stood out the most to him, as it made him feel the need to protect her from the harsher realities of their world. But now, glancing down to make sure she was still unconscious, he had to admit that she now possessed the beauty that had only been hinted out in her younger appearance. She'd let her dark indigo hair grow out, and it had only enhanced the features of her delicate face. After traveling for several hours, Naruto and Takashi came to a stop in a small clearing that was surrounded by such dense trees they knew it'd be hard to spot them once the sun went down. "This should be a good enough spot for now. I'll scout the area just in case. Set up camp and keep your distance from her. Remember, she's a gentle fist user, so don't drop your guard," Naruto told Takashi as she settled her down and flashed away. Takashi shook his head. "He's acting like he just met me or something. He knows I never drop my guard." With a worried glance in the direction his friend had disappeared, he thought, "I have a bad feeling about this job." For the second time, in what she hoped was still the same day, Hinata awoke to unfamiliar surroundings. Fantastic, this is becoming a habit. Except this time didn't seem as foreboding. This time she awoke outside with daylight upon her, laying on a bedroll reminiscent of her days as a genin of her village. She was lying on her right side and could feel a weight pressing down on her. Unsure of what the weight was or the situation she'd opened her eyes to find, Hinata attempted to maintain a steady breathing pattern. Recalling everything that had happened, especially Ronin, she felt her heart jolt in fear, then seemingly lodge in her throat. She needed to figure out what was going on, but before she could do anything a voice rang out. "You're safe. So there's no need to pretend to sleep or plot some ill-conceived escape." She thought that voice belonged to Ronin's partner. Choosing to face the situation head-on, she took a deep breath and opened her eyes, sitting up. She quickly discovered that she was wearing a long black coat, Ronin's coat, and judging from the weight it was lined with armor that would help thwart all but the very sharpest of blades. Suits of armor fell out of fashion because the added protection wasn't worth the loss in speed and agility. Flak vests like those worn by shinobi were more preferable because they allow for maneuverability. So for this man to wear a full armored coat, even a lightweight armor, He must possess the strength necessary to ensure it didn't hinder his mobility. Turning to look in the direction the voice had come from while gripping the edges of the coat together, she found Ronan's partner practically lounging against a tree. A quick glance around revealed Ronan himself was nowhere in sight. "How's your shoulder?" Bringing her attention back to the man before her, his dark brown eyes gave the impression he actually cared. There was a warmth in them absent from Ronan's eyes. He continued before she could respond, "Ronan took care of it while you were out." Takashi had to admit he was curious to see what her reaction would be. He could easily guess how her shoulder was feeling. That's not what he was curious about. "I bet it hurts like hell, but what do you think of Ronan stripping you down?" Takashi wasn't a bad guy, but he did get amusement out of the discomfort and embarrassment of others. Hinata chose to ignore what he'd said. "I will not think about that man, with that deadly aura, seeing me naked. Nope, won't do it." She feared if she did, then her face would reveal her thoughts, or worse, she'd faint again. "I think I've done that enough for one day. Where are we?" She felt as though she'd spoken around glass, but she needed answers. She knew they were no longer outside the network of caves they'd narrowly escaped. The trees were denser here, and there was no rubble. The man shrugged, replying, "The where isn't important," he said softly. "Just know that you're safe for the moment, and we'll be back in soon now that you're finally awake, Hyuga-san." "Why did you save me?" That question was plaguing her. "Allow me to catch you up on a few things. First, you've been missing for 36 hours. He paused to let that fact wash over her. "I thought I'd only been gone 12, maybe 14, she said in a confused whisper. "Yeah, those two dumb shits decided to keep you drugged to make traveling easier. Clearly they misjudged the dosage, judging by your physical state." He winced as took in her appearance. "It didn't do them much good, though. They were slow as hell. We caught up to you easily." Interrupting him, she asked, "Why would two assassins be sent on a rescue mission?" He cleared his throat before continuing, "Actually, it wasn't a rescue mission, it was a recovery mission. Your absence was quickly discovered, and we were hired by the Hyuga clan to recover you, dead or alive, by any means necessary," he stated point blank. Hinata knew the distinct difference between a rescue and recovery mission. These men honestly hadn't cared if they'd arrived too late to save her life, only that they had her body to return for their payday. She found herself disgusted anew by assassins. She was even more disturbed to learn that her own clan had only cared that she be returned, not that she be alive and well. "I'm not so sure I want to go back to Suna and what's waiting there for me." A sad sigh was heard before she returned her attention to the strange man. "I know the other one is Ronan, so who are you?" He brought his hand to his chest in mock hurt. "You haven't heard of me? Wow, everyone knows the big, bad, and evil, but no one ever remembers poor Takashi." He dropped his hand, replying drily, "That hurts, truly." The corners of his lips quirked at his own sarcasm. Standing up, he retrieved a dark bundle of cloth before tossing it to Hinata. "Here, I thought you might feel more comfortable if you weren't traipsing around in just my partner's jacket." The bundle landed in Hinata's lap and she begrudgingly mumbled a, "Thank you." "Yeah, I don't do so well with gratitude, and it's clear you don't like being beholden to someone like me. So walk through that stand of trees 14 yards and you'll find a stream. You can clean up a bit and change." He pointed in the direction to her right. "And know that escape would be a futile attempt which would only cause you more pain." Pursing her lips, she stood shakily grabbing the bundle of clothes in her right hand. "Where's Ronan?" Takashi revealed a genuine smile that made him appear even less possible of being an assassin. "Worried you'll be giving him a peep show? Relax, Hyuga-san, you aren't his type." Taking another deep breath, she attempted to quell her embarrassment and anger. Acting out emotionally is improper and hinders logical reasoning. One must always be in control. She mentally repeated the mantra her father had drilled into her. Having regained a precarious hold on her emotions, she left to clean up and get dressed. Finding the stream easily enough thanks to Takashi's instructions and her Byakugan, Hinata placed the bundle of clothes on top of a boulder and made sure no one was around. Deactivating her Kekkai Genkai, she lowered the borrowed coat off her shoulders, pausing to check the bandage. I must admit, for an assassin, he did a good job bandaging that. Continuing to look over her body, she noticed that her gown, I should just call this a rag after today, was barely hanging onto her hips. Stepping quickly out of the rag formerly known as her nightgown, she continued lowering the jacket only to feel a presence behind her. Turning, she dropped into a crouch and found the previously missing Ronin staring heatedly at her. She moved quickly to close his coat around her. When she looked into his eyes before, she could have sworn they were incapable of displaying emotion, but now the way he was looking at her. "Oh, there I go," she mentally cringed. "What is wrong with me? I should not be blushing because some assassin is eyeballing me like I'm his favorite snack." Hinata felt warmth spread through her stomach while staring into Ronin's eyes. She had to admit, without his coat on, she could see more of his lean build. The mask only added a mysterious quality that was somehow captivating. Remember, he's probably buck-toothed and wart-faced. Oh, but what a waste that would be. Attempting to regain her composure, Hinata stood from her crouch glaring at Ronin. He raised his hands in a supplicating fashion, taking 2 steps away from her. I was told you were ready to travel again. He said this as though it was the only apology he would offer for basically seeing her naked. Clearly I am not. She paused before inquiring, may I continue? Grimacing, she immediately realized how that sentence could be misconstrued as an invitation to let him watch her change instead of the subtle hint for him to leave she'd intended it to be. Briefly closing his eyes with a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, Ronin turned and left in the direction of the camp. Hinata felt herself blushing furiously over her slip of the tongue. Watching Ronin walk away, she attempted to make the blood in her face return to the rest of her body. This cannot be good for me after losing so much blood. I can't believe I said that, how humiliating. Ugh, why am I blushing? I haven't blushed in years. She felt saddened as she thought of the last time she'd blushed like this. Naruto, where have you gone? Staring at where Ronin had disappeared into the trees, she thought of his blue eyes and blonde hair. They were similar to Naruto's, but Ronin's eyes were far too cold. In the past, every blue-eyed blonde-haired boy had made her heart ache with worry over where her love had gone. If she'd met Ronin years ago, she might have believed, even hoped, that he was really Naruto. But she knew better. There was no way her Naruto-kun could become the cold, ruthless killer known throughout the elemental nations as Ronin. Activating her Byakugan again, she ensured that he had really left. Wait, I'd only just checked the area. How did he get here so fast without me seeing his approach? His speed must be part of the reason he's managed to survive this long and gain the reputation he has. Deciding to leave the kotan this time until the last possible minute, Hinata turned her back towards the direction of the men. Slipping a pair of pants on that she had to roll several times at the waist so they wouldn't slip off of her, she thought, yeah, that's just what I need, to give both of them a peep show this time. Luckily the pants stopped at her ankles. Clearly these were Takeshi's. Pulled her arms out of the sleeves of the coat, hunching slightly so it would hang on her arms through the sleeves of the shirt. She hunched further to carefully and painfully fit her head through the neck hole. Standing upright, she let the jacket slip off while tugging the shirt down. She pushed her hair out of her face to discover a nasty bruise from the hit Daichi had delivered. Wincing, she questioned how she could be attractive to anyone in her bruised and bedraggled state. I must still be woozy from everything. There's no way that man, or any man, could look at me with desire in his eyes. Sighing dejectedly, she thought back to the one she would have loved to have looked at her in such a way, and how it seemed as though he'd never truly seen her. Time to let these thoughts go and focus on the now. Focus on getting back to Suna unharmed, well, more than I already am. 20 minutes earlier. I'm being tortured. Naruto had mistakenly believed that he'd endured real torture before, but this was so much worse. Thoughts of Hinata's perfect had tormented Naruto, as he'd carried her in his arms away from the collapsed caves. Her skin had been so soft, and questions of how they would taste if he'd leaned down, as he'd been desperately tempted to kiss those small pink, plagued him. His body was so hard that leaping through the trees had never been so difficult for him. He'd been so distracted a tree branch had nearly taken his head. This of course led to a round of jokes at his expense from Takeshi. Though Takeshi irritated him to no end, he also comforted Naruto on some level, for he was not as cold and unfeeling as Naruto had become. Takeshi was able to gain enjoyment and find humor in life, despite being one to deliver death for a living. Naruto feared that if he continued this lifestyle for much longer, that would fade as it had for him. For Naruto, that ability had begun to fade long before he'd started taking lives for money. Now, searching the area surrounding their camp, thoughts of Hinata continued to be a distraction. She had always been gentleness personified, and now he believed she was beauty personified as well. He scoffed aloud at his thoughts as his mood changed from distracted and reverent to bitter. He'd learned, the hard way, that no one was innocent and people could be brutal. He would not allow himself to continue thinking of the Hyuga this way. She's a stranger to Ronin, and I will act accordingly. Just another job, we'll take her back and I'll never see her again. He had felt the presence approaching for a while, and now that it had finally arrived, his irritation only increased. Turning to look down at the small toad, his glare would cause most men to piss their pants. Leave! Go tell him to knock this shit off! He growled viciously. The toad gave a loud croak as its only response before it disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Once a month, Jiraiya would send out a mass network of toads in hopes of spotting Naruto. As soon as a toad had something to report, it would poof back to Mount Maiboka. Each time Jiraiya did this, he would check in with the toads for any new information they might possess. It was his old sensei's way of keeping tabs on him. At first he would ignore the toads when they found him. He had been far too angry in the first few months to respond. Then he'd begun giving the toads short messages that wouldn't reveal any details. As soon as the toad would poof away, Naruto knew it was time to leave a location. The toads didn't always find him. Sometimes he could go a year or more without being found. As the years passed, he'd begun to get angrier each time he was found, sending messages to tell the Toad Sage to leave him alone. Clearly the messages hadn't sunk in. Takashi had asked him, years ago, why he didn't just kill the toads so his location wouldn't be revealed, while sending a very poignant message to Jiraiya. When he'd explained his reasons based on the toad's innocence to Takashi, the young man had been confused that he could take a life for pay but wouldn't kill a toad to protect his location. I have to admit, it sometimes doesn't make sense to me either. 13 minutes earlier. He knew before entering the camp that Hinata wasn't there. This did not help his foul mood. He worried what the reaction would be if the toad had seen Hinata and was able to report to Jiraiya about her presence. Approaching Takashi quickly, with malicious intent apparent in his body language, he asked, "Where is she?" Takashi was still lounging at the base of a tree, appearing completely oblivious to Naruto's anger. He'd been waiting for him to return for just this moment. "Calm down. I loaned her some clothes, she changed, and now she's at the stream. Is everything okay?" "A toad," was all the response Naruto gave. "Damn." Takashi stood quickly and began packing up their gear. "I guess we're pulling an all-nighter on this one." Naruto gave an abrupt nod as he turned to look in the direction of the stream. With his back to Takashi, he didn't see the mischievous grin on his face as he nonchalantly said, "What are you waiting for? She's good to travel. Well, as good as she can be in her state. So go get her and let's get the hell out of here." As Naruto walked away, Takashi couldn't help but shake his head, imagining the embarrassment of the Hyuga heiress, and the frustration of his friend that would result from his mistake. Present. An image of Hinata's slide body in his coat scorched him, and he let out a long breath of relief as he moved away from her. Her weren't the only perfect part to her body. Her toned legs that led up to hips he could imagine gripping as he pulled her tight against him, making her scream in ecstasy. It had been so hard to fight the urge to go to her and make the thoughts in his mind a reality. "Damn that Takashi! He set me up." Naruto fumed as he trudged back to the camp, trying to press on through the discomfort of his tightening pants. More thoughts of his jacket and the way it had been touching and kissing her pale creamy skin struck him as he groaned in frustration. He knew it would carry her scent when he got it back, a constant reminder that she'd been naked in it. "If this keeps up, I won't make it through this job." Entering the small clearing, where Takashi had already packed up everything, Naruto's irritation boiled over. Takashi stood leaning against a tree, smiling at Naruto. "Did you get a good show? Or were you too late?" Naruto moved so fast it seemed as though a kunai came out of nowhere to fly at his head. Takashi tilted his head slightly to the left, allowing the kunai to graze his cheek and embed into the tree. He could have avoided it entirely, but he knew he deserved some punishment for that nasty trick. He wasn't without his own, albeit twisted, sense of right and wrong. Ignoring the light trickle of blood from the small scratch, he shrugged. "I guess you were too late." "Not funny, prick." Hinata stepped out of the trees with his jacket folded over her arms. Turning to stare at her, he thought how cute she looked in the two big clothes. She tossed the jacket to him with her uninjured right arm without even meeting his eyes. Catching it with one hand, he took a deep breath to hopefully fortify his resolve to treat her like any other job, the way Ronin would typically behave. Unfortunately, he was able to catch her scent coming off of the material in his hands. It was a light scent of lilacs, and something uniquely her. It was a scent that would torment for a long time to come. He was amazed that little shy, blushing Hinata had grown into a beautiful woman who was affecting him this way. He moved to collect a bento box from Takashi's pack. "Hey, what are you doing? I was saving that." A glare had Takashi throwing his hands up. "Fine." Holding out the box to Hinata, he watched her, studying every facet of her face, while trying to outwardly appear as his usual stoic self. Finally raising her eyes to meet his gaze, Naruto saw distrust and possibly hate. This helped him become detached again, as it reminded him of who he'd become, not who he'd once been. Hinata merely continued to stare him, and the offered bento box down. She didn't trust that they hadn't poisoned it, although if killing her was their goal, then they'd certainly had plenty of chances to do so before now. Stepping forward, she begrudgingly jerked the bento box out of Ronin's hand, saying a quick thank you for the food. Before moving away to eat, inside she found several rice balls stuffed with kakuni, a piece of braised pork. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she'd taken the first bite. She had to stop herself from moaning in appreciation of the food with its amazing flavors. She wondered who had prepared such a meal for the assassin. "Hurry, we're leaving soon." His voice had been low and cold, something she was beginning to note as his usual tone. Swallowing the food in her mouth, she inquired, "I thought you were settled for the evening." "Well, clearly you were mistaken, Hyugaheim." Hinata bristled at the veiled insult to her station within her clan and determinedly took her time, enjoying her first meal in over 36 hours. She had grown up being berated and ordered about. She'd become quite skilled at being defiant without saying a word over the years. Finishing her meal, she stood holding the bento box out to whichever male would take it. Takashi reached out with a saddened expression on his face, mumbling so low she almost couldn't hear him. Did she have to eat all of it? She couldn't have left even one bite. She felt embarrassment at the possibility that perhaps she'd overeaten, but quickly let that pass. I will not feel embarrassed or ashamed in front of two assassins for hire. Ronin had moved away to check his own pack while she was eating, and Hinata saw a ninjato tied to his back. It sat at a diagonal angle with the blade pointing towards his left shoulder and the handle pointing down towards his right hip. Clearly it was tied that way to be easily hidden and accessed under his coat. The fact that it was the 19-inch short sword tied to his back told her he liked the convenience of concealment, as well as getting in close to his opponents or victims to ensure their death. She narrowed her eyes to glare at him as he removed the sword from his back, attached it to his pack, and put his coat back on. She would have been surprised that he was unarming if she didn't instinctively know that the man had far more weapons hiding in his coat and on his person than anyone could ever discern. She could use her Byakugan to learn the amount and location of each weapon, but she honestly didn't want the affirmation of just how dangerous he could be to her. No, he wasn't dangerous. She told herself he was a coward and a bully, thus making her blood run cold and her anger snap. Turning to face her again, he tossed his pack to Takashi and began to approach her. Naruto caught the look of hatred in her eyes. Damn, how much worse would she glare at me if she knew the truth of who I am? Not that it mattered, this was just one moment out of many in his life, he tried telling himself. Yet despite her obvious contempt of him, every part of his body was attuned to her, wanted her. He was so hard and aching, it was all he could do not to limp. You're such a fool. He was Ronin. Cold and lethal, he did not need comfort, whether sexual or emotional, from anyone. Yet still a part of himself he tried to suppress wondered what it would be like to be comforted by her just once. Kami, even my thoughts are starting to sound ridiculous. Naruto froze for a second as he felt an additional presence watching them. Before he could react, it vanished. Another toad? No, that did not feel like a toad. We need to move. Shifting one foot back and to the side, Hinata was prepared to fight if necessary as Ronin approached. But it wasn't as he stopped 2 feet away, turning to present his back while bending one knee. Climb on. Shocked and slightly outraged, her eyes widened at what he was suggesting. No. Takashi spoke up. Hyuga-sen, we are leaving now to return you to Suna. Ronin will carry you so we can be sure you don't attempt to run off and cheat us out of our well-deserved pay for your recovery. I'm sure you'll return me safely as you've stated, even if only for your money. I have no intentions of running off, as you put it. I will travel alongside you. Hinata hoped they would take her word and leave it at that. She'd planned to slip away while they slept, since doing so from the stream was pointless when she knew Ronin was traversing around the camp. Capture would have been more likely then. I'm afraid we can't trust your word, common trait of assassins, I'm afraid. Now climb onto my partner's back so we can get moving, please. By the way, that is the last time I will ask. He'd started out smiling politely, but his stare had hardened as he'd finished speaking. Grinding her teeth and glaring at them both, she took a deep breath before obliging with their wishes. I can't believe I'm doing this. How much more? No, I won't even ask, because things will only get worse. She felt herself starting to blush a bit as she climbed onto Ronin's back, wrapping her legs and arms around him. She jerked a little when he wrapped one arm around each thigh just above her knees. Relax, he said as he straightened and immediately leapt into the tree branches to begin the trek back to Suna. Hinata tried to hold her upper body as far away from him as possible, without nearly slipping off or causing him to lose his balance. This didn't last long before she chose to relax, resting her upper body against his back. The moment she did, Ronin tensed at the change but gave no other reaction. The fact that he chose to ignore her for the most part helped in accepting the situation. Trying to distract herself from the warm body she was wrapped around, Hinata searched for any recognizable landmarks to determine how close they were to Sunagakure. She couldn't keep it up for very long. She was tired, and the warmth radiating off of Ronin combined his steady movements through the trees were lulling her. Naruto became even more inflamed, if that was possible, when she pressed her chest into his back. Her legs were wrapped around his hips, though not the exact way he wanted them to be. The scent of her body continued to assault his nose, making him want to swing her around so he could bury his face in her hair as he gripped one of her. Why didn't I let Takashi carry her? But he knew the answer to that, because he was stronger and could endure the extra weight for the time it took to reach their destination. He'd underestimated her effect on him, and he truly wondered if he could make it to Suna without being overcome by his urges. Shaking himself from those thoughts, he focused on leaping from branch to branch. He was so distracted when he needed to focus on their surroundings in case of an ambush. He began to think about that odd presence he'd felt back in the clearing. He worried over what it could mean. Naruto was surprised when he felt Hinata's head slump against his back as her arms relaxed even further around his shoulders. He could hear her even, slow breaths. He knew the day had taken a severe toll on her body. How else could she possibly allow herself to relax enough to sleep in the presence of a renowned assassin? In a small room located on the outskirts of Sunagakure, a half-man, half-plant-like creature seemed to sprout from the wall as the man waiting within the room tensed in fear. One half of the creature's body was black while the other half was white, and there was Venus flytrap-like opening surrounding his head. Your information was indeed accurate, June. I found Ronin right where you said he would be, for that the Akatsuki thanks you. A purse of ryos was tossed at June's feet. Of all the members of Akatsuki he had to deal with, this one's appearance made him uncomfortable. He found it odd that at times when the Akatsuki member spoke his mouth didn't appear to move. Your gratitude is thanks enough, Zetsu-san. I must ask, the Hyuga heiress, he trailed off, daring to inquire about her from Zetsu. After all, he had to give a report to one more man after this. The man-plant creature cocked his head to the side slightly. Although she is quite beautiful, we have no interest in her, though why you ask intrigues me. Nevertheless, this concludes our business with you. June feared a death blow at any moment, but then that was to be expected when you were a snitch for hire. Crouching while watching the Akatsuki member, he picked up the purse and backed out of the room. The white half of Zetsu spoke. Are you sure we should have let him go? Yes, we may have use of him later, the black half responded. We need to inform Toby, he'll be happy to know we've located our newest recruit. The white half asked, what of his partner? That is up to Toby, though I'm sure he will be discarded. Hinata found herself in one of the many training grounds within Kanahagakure. She turned in a complete circle wondering what she was doing there. She couldn't remember if she needed to meet with the other members of Team 8. She paused, wondering why she'd be meeting them here, as she hadn't been part of that team or a kunoichi for the village in nearly 8 years. Hearing someone approach, she looked up to see a 13-year-old Naruto walking up, his trademark grin upon his face as he rubbed the back of his head. Hey Hinata, it's been a long time, huh? Tears welled in her eyes, threatening to pour down her face. Naruto-kun, she said on breathless whisper. She felt herself reverting back to the shy girl she'd once been in his presence, including the blush spreading across her face. You look good, Hinata, if a little banged up, Naruto chuckled. He really hadn't been the best at social niceties, a fact she'd found refreshing as it led him to always be honest. Too often, because of her clan and within her clan, she saw people putting on facades. She'd witnessed the hurt such masks could cause. She couldn't stop staring at him, drinking in his image, and wondering what had happened to him. Naruto's face turned solemn as Hinata sensed a dark presence approaching from their right. Looking over, she saw Ronin in his deep red clothes, black as night jacket and mask. She wasn't sure what was going on, but she feared for Naruto as she prepared to step in front of him. Naruto stared at Ronin with an indescribable look upon his face. He turned back to her, looking deep into her eyes. I have to go now, Hinata. His voice had been so low and quiet, almost as if the life had been drained out of him. Ronin stopped his approach several feet away to stare coldly at the two of them. What? No, Naruto-kun, don't leave. But it was too late, for he'd already turned to walk away in the direction of Ronin. Hinata was so confused she couldn't grasp what was happening. She became frantic as Naruto seemed to completely fade from sight just as he passed by the dark assassin. The tears she'd been trying to contain spilled from her eyes as she tried to stop Naruto from fading away. Naruto-kun! Ronin was walking towards her with a sad look on his face, but Hinata was prepared to kill him for making Naruto disappear. She couldn't accomplish her goal as the world began to fade around her. Hinata jerked awake, scared and upset by the dream she'd had. Apparently the steady motion that had lulled her to sleep had suddenly stopped as Ronin was no longer jumping from branch to branch. She tried to get her bearings. Where am I? She asked drowsily. The border between Kaze no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni, Hyugaheim. She jumped off of his back as fast as possible, curling her lip in distaste at his continued insult of her station. Saying her name with Heim like that instead of San or Sama was as good as him outright disrespecting her station while insinuating she was nothing more than a spoiled princess. Your veiled insult is not appreciated right now. In the last 48 hours alone I've been drugged, kidnapped, strangled, stabbed, abducted, and now insulted by you. What's next on the agenda? A good maiming, some torture? Naruto chose to back off. She was right, she'd been through quite an ordeal and up to this point she'd handled everything well without hysterics. Bowing his head slightly, he did something he hadn't done in many years. He apologized. Forgive me, Hyuga-san. I was never trained in manners. No, you were trained to kill. Oh, Kami Hinata, what were you thinking prodding this man? She mentally cringed at the thought that he could have lashed out at her for standing up to him the way she had. Their confrontation was broken up when Takeshi jumped out of the trees, addressing Ronin. They'll be here shortly. He glanced suspiciously between his partner and the Hyuga heiress. He got the feeling something had happened between them while he located her approaching clan members. Naruto only nodded in response and moved away from Hinata to stand slightly behind her. He needed distance between the two of them. She'd begun to thrash a little, making sounds of distress before she jerked awake, and as he turned to face her, pain along with hatred had been clear in her expression. He couldn't help but wonder what she dreamt about that could cause such emotions. But as he'd attempted to push her away by insulting her, she'd called him on it, putting him in his place with a fire in her eyes that he longed to see there for other reasons. This day just keeps getting better. Damn my luck, Naruto thought as he glanced up. Stepping out of the trees across from them was Hiashi Hyuga, with Niji Hyuga to his right and 2 other Hyuga clan members following behind. Naruto noticed that between those unknown clan members was another man not of the clan. This one stood out greatly from the Hyugas. Each member of Hinata's clan, except of course for Hiashi, was dressed as a shinobi of Konohagakure. The man trailing behind them was out of place not only in their party but in the forest surrounding the border with his formal dark green kimono. Naruto's keen eyes could detect that the fabric of the kimono was high quality. He was slightly curious about the out-of-place man. In his line of work, things like that always fell under suspicion. Naruto watched as Hinata appeared, relieved to see her father, cousin and clan members, though the emotions were subdued, he could tell. Though as she'd begun to move forward, everything changed as her eyes landed on the formally dressed man traveling in the back of the group. He was literally watching Hinata close in on herself, and he could feel a coldness coming from her as she clasped her hands in front of her while awaiting their approach with a downcast gaze. Where was the fire he'd just seen her displaying? It was as if she was a completely different woman before him. He wasn't sure if this was her typical behavior around her father, but he was beginning to suspect it was the 5th man causing the light to fade from Hinata. The group stopped when Hiashi was within arm's reach of Hinata, though he did not reach out to touch her in any way. "Are you well, Nissim?" he questioned his daughter reservedly. "Yes, Otosan." Naruto didn't understand why she wouldn't mention to her father the hole in her shoulder. He gave a nearly imperceptible signal to Takashi. "Hyuga-san, your daughter suffered an injury to her shoulder caused by her abductor's earth spear. We've cleaned and bandaged it, but it will require treatment." Takashi's tone had been matter-of-fact, displaying no emotion, simply relaying necessary details. His lips pursing slightly. "I see." Finally turning to the 2 assassins, he barely glanced at Takashi before taking his time studying Ronin. Before another word could be spoken, the kimono-garbed 5th man stepped forward, approaching Hinata. "Hinata-chan, I'm glad you are well. We were all quite concerned when you disappeared." Naruto hadn't thought it possible for a man to give a more reserved and cold impression than Hiashi Hyuga, but this guy proved him wrong. Keeping her gaze downcast, a tight smile appeared on her face, one that didn't reach her eyes as she inclined her head slightly towards the man. "Thank you for your concern, Niza-san. We owe our thanks to Ronin-san and Takashi-san for my safe recovery." She'd barely managed to conceal the contempt in her voice as she called the job what it had been, a recovery mission rather than a rescue. Niza's eyes widened upon hearing the name Ronin, and he quickly looked to Naruto, his eyes seeming to narrow in a calculating manner. Naruto had seen that look many times. It was a sign that the person had just realized he was in the presence of a lethal killer, one who had a very large bounty upon his head. "I've got your number, pal," Naruto thought. Hiashi spoke up, turning slightly towards Niji. "You and Niza should begin escorting Hinata back to Suna so she can be attended by the medical ninja there." Nodding, Niji responded, "Yes, Ajizan." He turned, signaling the other clan members and Niza to begin escorting Hinata away. Niza, who had been standing near Hinata, reached out to place his hand upon her lower back in an attempt to guide her away. Naruto felt a growl building in his chest, and he fought to suppress it. It wouldn't do to growl like an animal in front of the head of the Hyuga clan while waiting for payment. However, the growl died quickly when he witnessed Hinata stiffen at the touch, glance up at Niza with another unenthusiastic smile, and move to walk close to her cousin. What is going on here? Who is this guy that Hinata clearly can't stand touching her? Naruto hadn't missed the fact that Niza had never once looked at Takashi, clearly deeming him unworthy of the man's attention. He probably wouldn't have looked at Naruto either if he hadn't learned the masked man standing before him was going by the name Ronin. As Niji led the rest of the group away, Hinata glanced back one time, but Naruto could not put into words what the expression was upon her face. He felt a twinge of pain in his chest as she was led away. He didn't believe he was capable of being upset over her departure, and nearly glanced down in search of a wound that could cause the discomfort. Not wanting to examine his emotions since he never let himself feel any, Naruto forced his attention back to Hiashi Hyuga, who was still standing before them. Takashi was the voice of their partnership when working a job, and he stepped forward to address the Hyuga clan leader. "We've met the conditions of the job contract, Hyuga-san. Your daughter has been recovered in as healthy a condition as possible, with her eyes still intact." Hiashi nodded, acknowledging Takashi's statement, before looking at Naruto. Your reputation obviously precedes you as a skilled assassin Ronin. I wonder if those skills could be applied to other endeavors. Ronin quirked an eyebrow inquiringly as a sign for Hayashi to continue. The danger to my daughter has increased and will continue to do so as the time of her wedding draws near. Hayashi paused. Naruto felt that twinge of pain increase upon hearing that Hinata would be married soon, and he now knew exactly who Nisa was. Anger began to boil inside him. Gritting his teeth, he crossed his arms to keep himself from going after that man and killing him. That man will have the right and privilege of touching her body, caressing it, as I'd imagine doing that alone is enough to warrant his death. Naruto had to admit he was shocked at these thoughts of possession he felt for a former acquaintance he'd known 8 years ago. I've of course placed some of the best shinobi within the Hyuga clan as her guards, and yet this abduction was still able to occur. I would pay the both of you a substantial day rate to guard Hinata until her wedding in 7 days. The Hyuga Council believes that once she is wed, the danger to her will decrease, if not cease altogether. When I say you would guard her from a distance, I mean it. I do not want it to be perceived that I lack faith in the abilities of my clan to protect my daughter. But I will take any steps necessary to ensure her security, even if it means hiring you. Both Naruto and Takashi had let Hayashi speak uninterrupted, but with one glance Takashi knew what their response to the offer should be. Takashi took the lead once more. Forgive us, Hyuga-san, your offer is very generous and your request is understandable, but I'm afraid we must decline the job. Hayashi's eyes remained on Naruto, though his body was turned towards Takashi. Naruto didn't miss the constant study of his person. The Hyuga clan leader nodded slowly, then retrieved the agreed-upon payment. Handing it to Takashi, he turned to leave, pausing to say, "If you change your mind, let me know, Ronin." Takashi moved to stand beside Naruto as they watched the Hyuga leave. When they were sure he truly left, they leapt into the trees, beginning the long trek they would take to dissuade pursuers from following. Are you sure about turning down the job? It is the decision I will stand by. 24 hours later. Naruto expelled his breath in harsh pants. Despite his enhanced stamina, he was beginning to feel the strain on his muscles from maintaining such a pace. He knew this wouldn't continue much longer. He dodged a Senbon aimed for his throat to rush forward, simultaneously blocking a kick to the ribs while attempting to slice his opponent across the chest with his ninjato. His opponent seemingly expected such a maneuver as he jumped back out of Naruto's extended reach due to the ninjato. Never ceasing his forward momentum, Naruto lunged onto his right foot, spinning to duck under his opponent's arm as it swung out to slash him with a kunai, placing himself directly behind his opponent. It was the perfect position to deliver a killing blow. Instead, Naruto used the flat of his blade to smack, none too gently, the back of his opponent's neck. You're dead. Just as the blade made contact, his opponent's image shifted to reveal a pile of molded mud that began to ooze its way to the ground, gripping onto Naruto's arm and leg. A shadow clone. Naruto leapt backwards, breaking free of the mud that attempted to hold him in place, his eyes frantically seeking out his opponent's location and next attack. As his feet touched the ground, he felt a grip upon his ankle attempting to pull him into the ground. His eyes crinkling slightly in a calculating smirk hidden behind his mask, Naruto vanished in a puff of smoke. Takashi began to climb out of the ground. Cheater. How long have you been using a shadow clone? He was feeling beyond exhausted but refused to quit. I may have bitten off more than I can chew this time. Naruto's voice seemed to echo around Takashi as he chuckled. You've got some gall accusing me of cheating after using Doton Kage Bunshin and Shinjuzanshu no Jutsu. I thought we agreed taijutsu only? Yeah, well, I don't have your infamous stamina. I had to end this session somehow. Takashi was facing the direction he believed Naruto was located. Naruto had to inquire about something that had stuck out in his mind. By the way, don't think I didn't notice that you chose not to keep those caves from collapsing on us when we rescued the Hyuga heiress. Your thrill-seeking could have gotten us killed. I had to find some way to motivate your old ass to move faster, didn't I? And you know what? It worked. Naruto leapt out of a tree 10 feet behind Takashi, placing his ninjato back into its sheath concealed under his coat. He didn't respond as he could tell his friend was warming up for one of his long-winded, and often ridiculous, rants. Takashi's shoulders lifted with a sigh and seemed to droop as he realized once again he misjudged when it came to sparring with Naruto. He turned to face Naruto. Sparring for 16 hours is a bit much, don't you think? You attempt to go this long during sex, you'll definitely kill a woman in bed. Takashi grimaced, watching Naruto's eyes turn cold. Sorry, that was a bad joke to make after what happened. Naruto turned away from him abruptly, demonstrating that he had no interest in listening to Takashi's apology. It wasn't his fault that Naruto had a few hang-ups about sex, like the fact that the last time he'd engaged in it his bed partner had slit his throat. Naruto had been forced to kill her in the bed they just aggressively destroyed during sex, as he bled out. Thankfully, the cut hadn't been as deep as she'd intended, and Takashi had been close enough to smell the blood. Indulging his impulses and lust was not something he would ever do again. Naruto owed Takashi his life, but that didn't mean he appreciated his latest attempt at humor. Shrugging, Naruto decided it was best to simply let it go. His friend hadn't meant to dredge up those memories. Look, I can't keep pretending that there isn't something bothering you. You've been acting like a fox with a sore paw since we returned the Hyuga heiress. So do you want to tell me what's going on in that mind of yours? Honestly, my body can't take much more of you working out your anger on me, Takashi continued on. 36 hours ago, Naruto had been reunited with an old friend by saving her life, discovered she'd grown incredibly beautiful, and became massively attracted to her. Never mind the fact that she had no idea who he was, further reason for him to ignore his attraction to her because she only saw him as Ronin. Then 24 hours ago he learned that she would be married in 6 days. Naruto felt angry at the situation, especially every time an image of Nisa touching Hinata, when she clearly didn't welcome that touch, flashed in his mind. He chose to focus on the wrongness of that image as an excuse for his anger, but his frustration stemmed from the fact that because he was now Ronin to the world, there was nothing he could do about Hinata's looming nuptials. Admittedly, he had been taking out his anger and frustration on Takashi since they'd returned to one of their more secure hideouts. He knew what he wanted to do, but he wouldn't. Perhaps he'd misunderstood the scene and Hinata simply didn't like displaying affection in front of others. Shouldn't you be checking to see if there are any new contracts? Takashi's eyes narrowed. He knew a brush off when he saw one. He simply nodded and left Naruto to his thoughts. I hope you can shrug this off, my friend. A distraction like the Hyuga will only lead to your downfall. Takashi had to travel amongst the trees for just over 2 hours before he reached the designated drop spot. His informant would leave messages about contracts he and Naruto might wish to fulfill hidden inside a fallen tree. As he slowed, preparing to drop down to collect the messages, he sensed the presence of his informant. It wasn't that he never caught the man as he was leaving them messages before, but it was surprising that the informant didn't appear to be leaving a message, rather he appeared to be waiting for one of them. Hello Jun, who are you backstabbing today? Takashi knew Jun provided information to anyone with enough money to pay his fee, oftentimes double-crossing people to gain a little extra real. The man had no sense of loyalty, only greed and fear of being caught in the act, leading to his subsequent torture and inevitable death. Jun jumped at the voice of Ronin's partner, halting his pacing as he'd waited for one of them to arrive. He hated how they always managed to appear and disappear so silently. Though he had to admit to himself he was glad to see the dark-haired young man rather than his masked partner Ronin. That man terrified him, and he was not comfortable about leaking information on him to the Akatsuki. If Ronin ever learned of his treachery, he would be made to suffer terribly for it. Needless to say, Jun was nervous about meeting with Ronin, but he needed to get word to them about this potential job. Jun tried to hide his case of nerves. Not you, stranger-san. At least not today, he silently added. Alright, what's so important that you felt the need to stick around in the middle of nowhere waiting for me? I was approached by a man yesterday morning asking if I knew someone who could perform an assassination while retrieving identifying body parts. I instantly thought of you and Ronin. Takashi appeared relaxed to Jun, but he was ready to take action if this was an attempted trap. I'm flattered you thought of us. What's the job? Jun winced slightly. That's the thing, this job is tricky. There is a contract already out for this target, but the information I received states a man wants to pay you and Ronin a fee to help him collect on the contract. Takashi's eyes widened as he released a full-bodied laugh. Slowly catching his breath, he pretended to wipe a tear from his eye before sobering. That's very funny, Jun. Jun began to fidget from one foot to the other. It's not a joke. Why would we accept a small fee to help someone else collect on a contract we could easily collect? Do you realize how stupid that would be of us to pass up the chance for the higher fee? But stranger-san, you haven't heard the terms of the offer or the details of the contract. Jun had to at least try convincing him to take the job. He did not look forward to returning with bad news. Very well, I need a good laugh today. Tell me what these details are. Takashi had been, at first, amused and slightly offended that someone would believe Ronin to be so stupid as to accept such a job. But as he listened to Jun give the details of the job, he became more concerned. Naruto was already in a foul mood and this would not help. He suddenly advanced on Jun, causing him to place his back against a tree. You will inform the idiot trying to hire someone to do the dirty work so he can cash in that no self-respecting assassin would accept such a stupid contract. Takashi turned to leave but paused, out of curiosity. Who is the dumbass that proposed such a contract? Jun nearly pissed his pants as he looked into the cold eyes of the stranger. I don't know, he stuttered. You know these things are done anonymously. A message was left at another contact point. And you immediately thought of us for this job? I didn't think it was out of the ordinary to come to you with it, no? Very well, Takashi leapt into the trees hiding to ensure June truly left the area before returning to Naruto. 8 hours later. Hinata sighed out of boredom and suppressed anger as she sat listening to her father and Nizu drone on about the benefits of their clan's union. It's not a joyful union of two hearts but a business merger to these two. She sat compliantly at the table waiting for the time that she could escape their presence. The journey back to Suna hadn't taken long, though it had certainly seemed to. Ronin and Takashi had traveled through the night to deliver Hinata to the border between Kaze no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni early the previous morning. She'd slept through the journey upon Ronin's back, a fact she wasn't too proud of, but a girl had to rest when she could. After being reunited with her clan members and Niza, the journey had seemed to take far longer. Niza had deigned the task of speaking to her unless absolutely necessary, too irksome apparently. Hinata knew his inquiry about her when they'd arrived at the border was for show in front of her father. It wouldn't do to have my father believe my future husband doesn't care that I was kidnapped and abused. Upon arrival in Sunagakure, Hinata had been met by the Kazakage Garasan with medical ninjas to treat any injury she'd incurred. The Kazakage had been apologetic that something like her abduction could occur within the walls of his village. Hinata had not developed a relationship with Gaara over the years as some of the Konohagakure shinobi had, but she knew that he had been close with Naruto, and she therefore held him in high esteem. He appeared wise for his age and well suited to the role of Kazakage that he maintained all these years. Hinata had assured him that the Hyuga clan didn't place any blame upon him for what had occurred, at least she didn't. She thanked him for his concern and the treatment provided by the village's medical ninjas. Thanks to their aid, the wound in her shoulder was nearly completely healed. At least I'm not walking around with a hole through it anymore. The bandage with a sling for my arm might affect the line my wedding kimono cuts, she thought sarcastically. Upon returning to her room at the inn, she had been bombarded with concern and questions from her young sister Hanabi, as well as the female branch members of her clan assigned to assist her in wedding preparations. Their concern was of course for her well-being after the abduction, but also over the fact that she'd been rescued by Ronin. All of their questions had been about him. They wanted to know every detail about the notorious man even the most hardened criminals feared. Hinata had felt exasperated at their misplaced interest in such a man, but she understood the allure of him. She herself had been highly curious about him before their encounter, and now she couldn't help but be even more intrigued. Though such thoughts didn't matter, for she would never see the man again, and I don't want to, she mentally lied to herself. There was something about him she couldn't quite put her finger on. It didn't help that when she'd finally slept, the disturbing dream of seeing Naruto again and Ronin causing him to leave replayed in her mind. Hinata could not figure out what the dream was trying to tell her. Mind you, the dream had not remained the same, but the premise did. She would be reunited with Naruto only to watch as his jovial mood changed to forlorn upon the arrival of Ronin, then Naruto would seemingly fade away as Ronin approached her. She always woke just before she was within Ronin's reach. These dreams shook her and made her more determined to sort out their meaning. Do you agree, Hinata-san? Hinata was jarred from her wonderings as she heard Niza say her name. Oh Kami, what were we discussing? I'm sorry. I fear I'm still overly tired from my ordeal. What did you say, Niza-san? Giving her a disapproving look as one would a forgetful child, he chose not to repeat his previous comment. Nizu instead replied, perhaps you should take a nap, Hinata-san. It was clear in his tone that he was gripping onto any excuse possible to get her out of his presence, which was fine by her for she didn't want to be near him anyway. Niza couldn't care less about her feelings or thoughts on any matter. He made that clear from the moment they met, though he certainly put on a good act in her father's presence. Hinata had tried to tell her father this, but he would hear none of it, believing she was simply suffering a case of pre-wedding jitters typical of weak females. Hinata longed to prove her father wrong when it came to his opinion of Niza and herself. How could he see her as anything but weak when she'd allowed him to browbeat her into giving up on being a shinobi of Konohagakure? She'd allowed him to mold her into his idea of an obedient, but weak, version of the daughter he saw her as. Without sparing a glance for her fiancé, Hinata stood bowing to her father. Please excuse me, Otosan. I believe I will retire to take a brief rest before dinner. Hayashi bowed his head. Very well, Muzum. I will have the physician come to your room in 2 hours. Hinata paused, wondering just how much she had missed of this conversation. I'm sorry, Otosan. Why would the physician be coming to my room? My shoulder is nearly healed. Hayashi, for his part, actually appeared slightly uncomfortable before giving her another disapproving look. The look he nearly always has when he looks at me. Hinata, Niza has demanded, as is his right as your betrothed, that you be examined to ensure you are still pure after your ordeal. Hinata's eyes nearly bulged out of her head at the audacity of this man. She understood it was his right and an understandable concern after a kidnapping such as hers, but she was angered and embarrassed. Both emotions stemmed from his doubt in her assertions that she had not been raped, and the humiliation of having to submit to such an exam. Clenching her teeth to keep from telling Nizu just where he could shove his exam, Hinata spoke slowly and clearly as she replied, "Of course, Otosan, as it is his right to demand such an exam, it is my duty to acquiesce." Hinata attempted not to storm from the room but instead flow out of it as was proper for a lady of her station. Once the door of the room was closed with her standing on the other side out of view, she had to take a deep, calming breath. She couldn't help but be angry and dejected at the course her life was taking and the fact that she had no say in its direction. Lost deep in her own thoughts, Hinata turned the corner to head down another hall. Her room was located at the end of it. She hadn't noticed that the normal guard of branch clan members was no longer in the hallway. If she had, perhaps she would have been on guard. Hinata glanced up just in time to see a man rush forward while slicing at her throat with a kunai. Throwing her upper body backwards in an attempt to dodge the kunai, Hinata overcompensated, and her weight began to pull her down to the floor. She allowed herself to fall, bringing her right leg up at the same time. She caught her attacker in the gut as his momentum threw him forward, leaving him unable to stop. When he hunched over from her kick, Hinata snapped her foot back to release it in a powerful kick to the side of the man's head. He fell into the wall and began to slide down as Hinata rolled to stand, preparing to call out for help as she turned away only to be stopped by a second man grabbing her by the throat. She thrust both palms into the man's sternum, channeling enough chakra to throw him backwards. Hinata studied the situation. The first man to attack her was attempting to climb to his feet behind her, and the second attacker was down, but not out, in front of her. The two had successfully blocked both possible escape routes for her. She chose to run past the second attacker back in the direction of her father. As she approached the downed man, she kicked out to hit him in the side of the head, incapacitating him. Just as she reached the corner, she slammed into the chest of another man whose hands immediately rose to grip her upper arms. A quick glance up had Hinata pausing her instinctive attack. Standing before her was Ronin, staring down at her with cold blue eyes. "He's going to kill me now," she thought as he glanced up towards the other two attackers, then quickly turned to press her back to the wall. He pressed his body close to hers, forcing her tight into the wall as an explosion rocked the hallway from the direction of the attackers. 5.5 hours earlier, Naruto decided to look over some of the jutsu scrolls he and Takashi had managed to acquire over the years and continue training, while waiting for his partner's return. Since leaving Konoha, his training had been a bit limited. He met several freelance assassins his first year away from the village who had trained him in their trade. After all, he needed a way to eat. The assassins had provided that way, along with giving him valuable skills to remain hidden from his home village. Though convincing them to train him hadn't been easy and had nearly cost him his own life, they'd finally relented. However, jutsus hadn't been a big specialty of theirs, so Naruto did what he'd always done. He learned through trial and error. If Naruto witnessed a particular jutsu he thought would be beneficial, he studied every aspect of it in action, then tried his hardest to recreate it to his best ability. Oftentimes this method failed, and sometimes he had to steal jutsu scrolls from other villages. But when it was successful, he got that old feeling of accomplishment he'd gained when training with Ero-Sennin and Kakashi-sensei. Through this method of training, he discovered he had an affliction for wind-release jutsus. He could surprisingly use other elemental jutsus besides the wind release, though some were more efficient than others. Takashi leapt out of the trees behind Naruto, and chose not to waste any time informing his friend of what he'd learned from June. Naruto beat him to the punch, turning to assess him. "What's wrong? Do we have a job?" Takashi walked past him to begin gathering their things. No, we do not have a job in the "we've been contracted and will receive pay" concept of having a job. One of Naruto's eyebrows quirked up in confusion and slight amusement. "You do realize that made no sense, right?" Sighing deeply, Takashi squared his shoulders and turned to face his friend. "June was waiting for one of us at the drop point. He had a rather interesting job offer, to say the least." Naruto crossed his arms over his chest before waving with one hand for Takashi to get on with it. "Alright, there's no easy way to explain this job to you. So here goes. Hinata Hyuga has a contract out for her assassination and the retrieval of her eyes. The fee is actually for her eyes and not her death. Someone contacted June to hire us for the job but wants us to submit the eyes so this mysterious person can collect the actual reward on the contract, not us." Takashi had made sure to share the information in one breath without pause, as he could see the anger building in Naruto's eyes. Naruto felt a burning rage build inside of him at the idea that Hinata was being hunted so ruthlessly. He had a good idea where the original contract on her eyes had originated. But for someone else to seek him out to do the dirty work and allow that person to collect on a contract was the odd part. The whole situation sounded wrong. Who proposed the job to June? He claims it was done anonymously. Naruto growled, cutting off Takashi. He knew that was a lie. Even when one tried to remain anonymous, that was impossible with June. The only reason June didn't know his true identity was because he and Takashi were paranoid bastards whom June feared above all else. Takashi knew Naruto would be angry. Only an idiot could have been so blind as to not see the attraction his friend was feeling towards Hinata Hyuga. But Naruto was highly unpredictable and Takashi wasn't sure what action, if any, he would take in regards to the threat against a woman Takashi suspected he'd known before leaving Konoha. Naruto began to pace while thinking over everything. He began to mumble. Hayashi had to have suspected there was a contract. Why else would he offer to hire us to shadow Hinata? Takashi knew Naruto wasn't actually speaking to him, but was merely thinking out loud. It was a bad habit he'd developed when something truly troubled him. Takashi chose to interject his opinions into Naruto's rambling anyways. Yeah, but you turned down that job offer. Remember you did the whole "it's the decision I'll stand by" spiel. Naruto paused mid-step to throw a glare at Takashi. I can't just sit by and let her be hunted, he thought to himself. Let's go. Takashi merely nodded, understanding there'd be no arguing with Naruto on this matter. 5 hours and 28 minutes later. Naruto and Takashi had managed to infiltrate the village of Suna thanks to a contact of Naruto's that Takashi had never met. Their luck even held up as they snuck into the inn without being discovered by the Hyuga clan members. Naruto signaled for Takashi to take another route to reach Hinata's room once they'd discovered its location. Naruto had a feeling that if the man had asked Jun to hire them, then there was no doubt he'd attempt to hire someone else. Naruto wasn't going to take any chances. Takashi entered the hall near Hinata's room just as she'd run by an attacker and kicked him in the head. Not bad. Just as he came even with the door to the Hyuga heiress room, it swung open to reveal another Hyuga female with her dojutsu Kekkai Genkai activated. Takashi couldn't help but admire the girl before him, taking in every detail of her in a matter of seconds. Again I say not bad at all. Clearly her Byakugan had allowed her to see some of the altercation in the hall because she swung a chakra-filled palm at Takashi's heart. Catching her wrist, he quickly spun the girl back towards the room, shoving her in with a quick swat to her ass. Best if you stay in here, gorgeous. It'll be safer, he said as he slammed the room door on a very irate Hanabi Hyuga. Hinata's first attacker stood, and catching sight of Ronin in the hallway, chose to run in the opposite direction. This of course brought him straight to Takashi, who threw a kunai at his head. The attacker decided to make himself an exit rather than wait around for Ronin to catch up to him. However, this would prove to be the wrong decision, for as he slipped an exploding seal out of his pouch, another of Takashi's kunai caught him in the wrist. The man in his pain mistakenly set off the seal. Oh, you baka! Takashi immediately turned, barging into the Hyuga's room only to be struck in his abdomen before a blast threw him and the young Hyuga female to the floor. Kami, she has the most beautiful eyes, Naruto thought as he looked down at Hinata. Then he heard the blast and tensed to take the brunt of the repercussion, shielding Hinata with his body by caging her in. He tucked his head in against her throat, inhaling the scent of her body, even stronger now that she wasn't covered in dirt and blood. He felt like he'd been hit in the gut, pressed so tightly against her. An instinct to take advantage of having her in this submissive position raged through him, but there were other matters to deal with. Naruto groaned as he pulled himself away from her. He would never forget the imprint of her every curve pressed against his body. Glancing down the hall, he saw the attackers were dead, caught in the blast, but he didn't see Takashi. Getting a firm grip on Hinata's wrist, he dragged her in the direction of where his friend should be. As they neared where he'd last seen Takashi, he heard a groan coming from a room. Looking in, he had to admit even he was shocked at the sight. There lay Takashi sprawled on top of a female with his hips conveniently placed between her spread thighs. Get up, Takashi, we don't have time for your indulgences. Hinata had been in shock and she finally found her voice. Hanabi. She attempted to rush to her sister's side, but Ronin's grip on her wrist stopped her. Naruto's mind was working in overdrive as Takashi climbed off of a struggling Hanabi, taking a couple more blows from the looks of it. Female. Seriously, knock it off, I just saved your life. Takashi was struggling to rise to his feet, while blocking the fists and feet of the young woman he found himself on top of. Get off of me! Hanabi screeched. Naruto chose to ignore the frustrations of all three of the people in the room. He knew Takashi wasn't ignoring him. Takashi, grab her. She's coming with us too. What? Was all Naruto heard simultaneously from three different people as Hanabi renewed her struggles with Takashi. Hinata chose that moment to begin to struggle. Hinata was so tired of everything she'd had to suffer the last few days. Her arranged betrothal, abduction, rescue, the continued contempt of her betrothed, another attempt on her life, and now this, it was all too much. Activating her Byakugan, Hinata lashed out with a Juken strike that made contact with the Tenketsu points in Ronin's shoulder. He released her left wrist as his entire arm dropped uselessly to his side. Hinata wasn't finished. Her anger was overflowing as she proceeded to strike as many Tenketsu points as possible to incapacitate Ronin. As he fell into the wall, she turned towards Takashi, Resuming her old fighting stance, she immediately rushed at the man. Naruto had expected some argument from Hinata, but not an all-out attack. If he had been anyone else, those strikes of hers to his tenketsu points would have laid him out. Instead, it merely knocked him off balance as the Kyuubi inside of him worked to heal and reopen his closed chakra network. He saw her preparing to charge Takashi and felt bad that the sight of her fighting spirit was turning me on. But this was not the time for that. They needed to secure both Hyuga females and leave the area. Forgive me, Hinata. Before Hinata could get within 3 feet of Takashi and Hanabi, she felt pain explode at the base of her skull before the world around her went dark. She thought she heard her sister scream her name as she lost consciousness. Naruto winced behind his mask after striking Hinata to knock her unconscious. He swooped her up into his arms as she began to fall to the floor. Hanabi panicked at seeing her sister get knocked out, but when Naruto looked up to assess the situation with her, he discovered Takashi had followed his lead and rendered her unconscious as well. Unfortunately, he hadn't followed his example of catching the girl before she had fallen to the floor. Naruto sighed and shook his head. What? Takashi asked, clueless. Remind me to teach you some of the finer points of being a gentleman another time. Naruto gave a pointed look at the prone body of Hanabi on the floor. Takashi glanced left and right, then down at Hanabi. Lifting a finger to point at her, he grimaced. That might not have been my smoothest move. I should probably get that, huh? You think? Takashi gathered Hanabi into his arms. As he straightened to stand, both he and Naruto heard shouts approaching. Naruto set Hinata down gently between his bent knees, bracing her weight against him as he performed a few hand seals, then placed his right hand on Hinata's back at the base of her neck. A seal was left behind that quickly vanished from sight. He saw that Takashi had the forthright to do the same to Hanabi. Picking up Hinata, he said, "Time to go." Each man carried a Hyuga female as they split up, taking 2 different routes to escape that section of the inn. What do you mean he turned down the job? I didn't pay you that absurd fee for you to fail. Jun held his ground. This man before him, while cold and calculating, was nowhere near as terrifying as Ronin or the Akatsuki. I did my best, but that half-thrown-together plan to convince him to help someone else collect on a contract was ridiculous. Ronin's partner laughed in my face. They haven't survived this long by being stupid. The man waved Jun's comments away. Fine. You've cost me the bounty on Ronin's head, but no matter. I've already made other arrangements. The Hyuga eyes will be in my hand before the night is out. I will collect the reward for them and get the hell out of this village. Jun was frustrated. He had hoped that somehow this man could come up with a plan that would put Ronin in a position for the Akatsuki to approach him. Now Jun would nothing to report. Hopefully Zetsu had been able to keep tabs on Ronin. If not, Jun may not live long enough to spend all the ryos he was collecting. He was really beginning to feel like a cook who tries to stir too many pots at once. Eventually something is going to boil over. Naruto laid an unconscious Hinata down upon the bed, wincing slightly. I might have hit her too hard. Naruto reached out to push the hair out of her face. His touch lingered, caressing her cheek before he caught himself and jerked away. This can't happen, he told himself of the longing he felt while looking at her. Returning to the main room of the suite, he saw Takashi watching Hanabi as she lay upon the couch. He looked at her as though he were studying a puzzle that needed to be solved. Before Naruto could comment on Takashi's behavior, a light knock was heard on the door. Wordlessly, he signaled to Takashi to stay out of sight as he checked to verify their visitor before opening the door 10 inches. Standing there was an ANBU of Suna wearing a strip of cloth to hide all of his face except for his eyes. Naruto bowed his head slightly. Thank you for coming. The ANBU spoke in a low tone. Yes, well, I had no choice, thanks to your antics in the other wing of this inn. Here, he sent you these, use them wisely. Naruto accepted a wrapped bundle of beige cloth and a key. I understand, tell him. The ANBU held up his hand, halting Naruto mid-sentence. He knows. He said to tell you, be sure of what you want, whatever that means. The ANBU immediately turned and left Naruto in silence. Thank you, Kankuro, he silently thanked the man as he walked away. Naruto knew what the message meant. It was a conversation that had occurred several years ago between himself and Gaara, one his wise friend seemed to enjoy reminding him of. 6 years ago. Kazekage-sama, we captured this young man attempting to enter the village. 2 shinobi of Sunagakure stood behind a 15-year-old Naruto who kept his head down so the hood of his cloak wouldn't reveal his hair, thus giving away his identity. Glancing up, he was shocked when he discovered who the Kazekage was. Sitting behind a large desk sat one Gaara of the desert. At least one of us managed to achieve something with our lives. I'm proud of you, Gaara. Gaara studied the figure standing before him in a mask and cloak. Are you a threat to my village? He asked the young man, who only shook his head no. He peered at this shinobi questioningly. Kazekage-sama, he refused to remove his mask and cloak. He refused to tell us what village he is affiliated with, and he refused to give a reason for seeking entrance to the village. Gaara nodded slowly and appeared puzzled as he began speaking to the young man again. Is this true? Before the young man could nod in affirmative, one of the shinobi nudged him hard. You will speak to the Kazekage with the respect he deserves, not with nods and shakes of your head, the shinobi said with authority. Gaara saw the young man's hands clench into tight fists. Yes, Kazekage-sama, it is true. And do you have an affiliation with any known villages? Gaara questioned. No, Kazekage-sama. What is your purpose in Suna? At this question the young man sighed, then raised his head slightly, allowing the hood of his cloak to slip back so that a few strands, which looked like spikes, of blonde hair were noticeable. Gaara looked into the young man's eyes and knew who stood before him. Waving his hand he dismissed his shinobi. Leave us, I have much to discuss with this young man. But Kazekage-sama? Gaara interrupted his shinobi. You will leave us. My safety is not in jeopardy, is it? He asked of the young man before him, whose eyes crinkled above his mask. No, Kazekage-sama, you are not in jeopardy from me. With that, Gaara waved his shinobi out of his office as they attempted to stutter protests, while eyeing the village intruder warily. As the door closed behind the shinobi, Gaara enacted privacy seals around his office. Naruto Uzumaki, I must say I am both surprised and pleased to see you alive and well in my office. Naruto lowered the hood of his cloak while Gaara closed the windows and curtains around his office. Once it was no longer possible for anyone to see or hear inside the office, Naruto lowered the mask on his face as well, smiling at Gaara. It is good to see you again, Gaara. It's surprising, and forgive me for stealing a term from Shikamaru Nara, troublesome to see you again, Naruto. The corner of Naruto's mouth quirked up in a half-smile at the mention of Shikamaru, and the use of his most commonly used phrase. You've put me in a tough position coming here, Naruto. You've been a missing nin of Konohagakure for 2 years, and as such it should be my duty to immediately detain you and report your location to the Hokage. So tell me what has led you down this path, and why I won't be doing as I should. Naruto gestured to one of the chairs in a request for permission to sit, and Gaara nodded in affirmative. Opening his cloak and taking a seat, he said, I thank you for not detaining or reporting me, Gaara. I do not wish to cause you any trouble. Gaara noticed the dark red color of Naruto's clothing. I see you have more to tell me other than why you left Konoha, my friend. At Naruto's blank look, Gaara gestured to his clothing, like why you've taken on the persona of Ronin, an assassin who is gaining quite a reputation. Naruto rubbed the back of his head, a habit he'd yet to fully break. How have I amassed a reputation? I've only been working as an assassin for a few months. Well, when one assassin can amass an army in the blink of an eye, people start to notice. Damn, I have to be more careful of what jutsus I use. I knew Rasengan was out, but I didn't think the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu was. Gaara seemed to be reading Naruto's thoughts. You have to be more careful if you don't want to be found. Using a shadow clone technique isn't unheard of, but no one other than Naruto Uzumaki can use that technique to such a level. Coming here could have been the biggest mistake you've made, so far. Could have been? Naruto inquired. Gaara smiled wryly. As I said, I won't report your location to Konohagakure. Please begin, I'm sure this will be a riveting tale. Naruto gave a humorless smile to Gaara before stating, I no longer claim affiliation to any village, nor do they claim me. Naruto proceeded to explain to Gaara his reasons for becoming a missing nin, becoming an assassin, and going by the name of Ronin. After listening to his explanation, Gaara proclaimed that as long as it was within his power, Naruto, or Ronin, would have sanctuary within Suna. Of course, by within his power, Gaara meant as long as he could manage it secretly without revealing that he allowed a missing nin to remain untouched within his village. You were my first friend and one of the only people who understood how I felt as a Jinchuriki. I will do my best to help you by honoring that bond, Gaara stated proudly. I cannot express how grateful I am for that, Gaara, but I do not wish to bring trouble to you or this village. Gaara ignored his friend's concerns as the two devised a system for relaying messages and a way for Naruto to enter the village without detection. Present. Takashi had never met Naruto's contact in Sunagakure. His friend claimed it was too risky. He didn't feel insulted or believe that Naruto lacked trust in him. He understood that it must be necessary, for Naruto trusted him with every other aspect of his life. He could not hear the words being exchanged at the door, though it didn't appear to matter as the interaction seemed to last no longer than a minute. Naruto secured the door and turned back to Takashi. Unwrapping the bundle in his arms, he held out a suit of clothes to him, and a key. Here, get changed, then you're going to take her, he pointed to a still unconscious Hanabi, to the room this key is for, and secure her there so you can report the situation to her father. He paused to give Takashi a withering look. I do not mean tie her down either. You will use the seals I taught you to keep her from escaping the room. Takashi looked appalled. You sure do know how to take all the fun out of a situation. Do you know that? He snatched the clothes out of Naruto's hands to change in the bathroom. Coming out of the bathroom, he appeared to be dressed as an ANBU of Suna in the beige shirt, pants, and flak vest with cloth wrapped around his head and covering his face below his eyes. He silently picked up Hanabi, more gently than Naruto would have expected, and left the room. The inn consisted of 4 wings, each one strategically arranged as though pointing in a specific direction, with several lounges and conference rooms located at the epicenter, as well as throughout the 4 wings. The Hyuga heiress room had been in the east wing. Takashi and Naruto had relocated both females to the north wing. Now Takashi carried Hanabi further down the north wing to a separate suite. How does no one in this stinking hotel notice 2 high-born females being carted around this place? Takashi mentally shrugged. Guess I shouldn't complain, wouldn't want to bring attention to them when we just saved their asses. Glancing down at the passenger in his arms, he thought, that is a perfect ass. The reasoning behind this is the old cliché of beware your enemies least suspect you. They don't expect you to be right under their noses or to remain in an area where you were just attacked. Splitting up the Hyugas was a necessity. While Hinata is the primary target of the contract, if she were to go into hiding, there's no reason why Hanabi wouldn't then be targeted for her eyes. Takashi knew Naruto was now placing him solely responsible for the safety of the younger Hyuga, a fact he wasn't fond of, not because he hated being alone with a good-looking female. No, his dislike stemmed from concern over allowing Naruto to be alone with a female he was attracted to. The fact that they'd been needed to save her life twice in 40 hours led proves that she is a magnet for trouble and danger. Obviously, she's attracting the deadliest freaking assassin. Takashi juggled the young woman in his arms to unlock the door to the suite. Using his foot, he kicked it closed and turned to find the bedroom so he could set down his passenger. She's pretty good at pretending to be unconscious while waiting for a good time to strike. Like when there's no risk of me dropping her flat on her ass. Deciding to test her, Takashi stated, "It's too bad you're unconscious, beautiful. We could have fun while waiting for daddy to come collect you." "Ah, who am I kidding? I'll have fun whether you're conscious or not, just as soon as I get you secured to that bed right there." Takashi waited for the bundle in his arms to lash out. He had to admit she had been cute when attacking him before and after the explosion. He expected another display of her attempts to hurt him because of his lecherous words. When she didn't immediately try attacking him, he set her on the bed, constantly on guard, but amazingly she continued the act of being unconscious. Backing away warily, he waited. Hanabi had returned to the land of wakefulness just in time to hear a conversation about not tying her down to a bed. That's a comforting conversation to wake to. She pretended to remain unconscious, hoping to hear details of her sister's location and condition, but she was quickly picked up. It took every ounce of willpower to remain relaxed. It's a natural instinct when conscious to tense up when a stranger touches you, let alone picks you up. Her efforts seemed to be wasted as either man spoke again, and she was carried at least 30 feet out of the room she'd woken in. She'd guessed this distance based upon how many steps the man had taken while calculating in the average length of a man's strides. It was a method she'd learned from Hinata many years ago when she was still a part of Team 8. She'd thought her sister was so cool back then. And now she's... With a mental shake of her head, Hanabi forced herself away from such thoughts. Now was not the time. She needed to learn where they'd moved her to so she could escape and find Hinata. She waited, listening for any movement to indicate the man had left the room. But as she thought about it, she realized he'd carried her without making a sound. Other than the typical noises of one opening and closing a door, the trip had been eerily silent, except of course for when he spoke. She couldn't deny that she'd felt a rage ignite inside her, but she'd been trained to wait, to be patient, and await the opportune moment to strike. After waiting for what felt like 20 minutes, she had to risk activating her Byakugan to determine if he'd left. She looked around the room, but there was no one present. Hanabi saw that she was in a suite similar to the one she'd shared with her sister. I must still be in the inn. Maybe Hinata is still here too if they didn't abduct her. If I can get out of this room, then I can search for her. Sitting up, she maintained her Byakugan to alert her of the young man's return. She wanted nothing more than to rush from the room and find her sister. However, as soon as she stood up and deactivated the Byakugan, she gasped, falling back onto the bed at the sight of the Suna Anbu before her. "When did you arrive?" Rising, she began to move past him. "Did you see the man who left me here? Has he been detained? We must begin a search for my sister immediately." Her voice was filled with every ounce of command befitting of her station that she could muster. She spoke so quickly the ANBU appeared to have difficulty making sense of the jumble she just spat at him. Before she could get past the ANBU, he grasped her arm. "You will be staying here, gorgeous." Eyes widening in shock, she turned to look up at him, recognizing that voice and becoming angered that she'd been tricked so easily. Enunciating every word slowly, making sure she had his attention drawn to her face, she stated, "No, I will not." She'd reached up to grip the thumb of the hand holding her arm, twisting it away to make him release her. She jammed that elbow into his side quickly with enough force to send him stumbling several feet away. At least that's what should have happened. Instead, the man swung his opposite arm around her neck, turning her to pull her back to his chest tightly, with his forearm lightly pressing on her throat. Hanabi froze, knowing that if he began to apply pressure to the carotid artery, there was nothing she could do to stop him from rendering her unconscious in seconds. His other arm wrapped around her midsection, further ensuring she did not struggle. She was alone with a man who possessed the skills to stop her and remain undetected by her Byakugan. How the hell did he do that? I should have clearly been able to see him standing in front of the door. His voice was a low rasp in her ear as she clenched her teeth at the precariousness of her situation. Apparently you forgot the fact that I saved your life earlier. Now tell me, why would I do that if I intended to kill you now? Hanabi struggled slightly. Why should I presume to know the thoughts of some strange assailant? Good point, Higaheim. Hanabi bristled at his snide dig. What do you want? If you are going to kill me, then do so. If your intention is to rape me, I swear you won't live to regret it. Takashi had been enjoying this encounter immensely. There was something about the little Hyuga in front of him that intrigued him. He sighed, knowing he had to end this little battle of wills and see to the task Naruto had assigned him. An enticing scent reached him through the NBU mask, and he couldn't help but tilt his head down slightly to discover the source was the Spitfire in his arms. Hanabi felt the man lean his head closer to her, and she tried to jerk away from him. What do you think you are doing? Let go of me at once? Takashi took that moment to apply the necessary pressure to render her unconscious once again, though this time he made sure not to let her hit the floor. He quickly placed her back upon the bed and set about placing the seals on the windows and outer door that would render her unable to exit the room. Taking one more look at the unconscious young woman, Takashi smiled slightly under the cloth covering the lower half of his face and exited the room. Meanwhile, Hinata came awake suddenly, sitting up in bed feeling panicked but unable to recall the reason behind the emotion. Looking around, she found herself alone in her room, but upon a closer inspection she realized something wasn't right. All of the furniture was on the opposite side of the room. I'm not in my room, I'm still in the inn, so whose room is this, she thought questioningly. Then the memory of the attack in the hall, Ronin, the explosion, and Hanabi flashed through her mind. Hanabi, where are you? She whispered to herself. Activating her Byakugan, she searched the rest of the suite and found no one. What the? Why would they abduct me and Hanabi then leave me alone? Was the attack really aimed at her, and I simply got in the way? Hinata pushed her field of vision further, attempting to seek out Hanabi's chakra signature. This was taxing not only on her eyes but on her chakra reserves. However, she was determined to search the entirety of the inn. She had to know if Hanabi was still close by. Hinata took her time identifying every person within the immense structure and grounds of the inn, searching for Hanabi. She'd already managed to locate her father, Niji, and the rest of the clan members traveling with them. She became increasingly frustrated as the strain of using the Byakugan began to take its toll. She attempted to expand her vision even further to search the area surrounding the inn. Unfortunately, it was at this point a sharp pain shot through both eyes and she felt a warm trickling of liquid flow down her face. Hinata knew she'd pushed too far when the coppery scent of blood reached her nose. Closing her eyes, she felt dejected that she was unable to push herself beyond these limits to locate her sister. She rose while keeping her eyes shut and attempted to make her way to the bathroom, navigating the room by memory. She froze, however, when she heard a voice that sent shivers down her spine. Naruto had been silently pacing in the outer room of the suite, pondering how to handle being alone with Hinata and what his next steps in her protection should be when he smelled blood. Fearing what the cause could be, knowing it was impossible for anyone to have entered the room, he wasn't sure what to expect, but he was not expecting to see Hinata alone in the room, shuffling towards the bathroom with her hands outstretched before her. He halted his forward progression into the room. What have you done? His question came out harsher than he intended, and he prayed to Kami that she wouldn't be able to identify the level of worry in his tone. Hinata couldn't believe Ronin was in the room. How is he able to enter my field of vision so fast? Swinging around to face him, she opened her eyes but found her vision obscured by blood. Rather than reveal a weakness by attempting to rub her eyes, she instead slipped into a fighting stance, ready to defend herself. Naruto sucked in his breath sharply at the sight of blood streaming from Hinata's eyes. He knew he hadn't caused that when he'd rendered her unconscious. You little baka, what have you done? He asked softly. Hinata was confused at his tone. He almost seemed concerned. Where is my sister? She demanded. She couldn't see him, nor did she hear any movement, but suddenly her face was gripped softly on either side as he titled her head up. One part of her mind was shocked at the gentleness of his touch, while the more prominent part of her mind felt a rush of fear-induced adrenaline. She attempted to jerk her face away while launching a blind attack, but he maintained his grip on her face and deflected her efforts to get away, all without causing her any pain. Stop, he growled. I need to see the extent of the damage. Shocked by his actions and words, Hinata froze as confusion spread across her face. I don't understand, she whispered. What is there to understand? He questioned as he began using his fingertips to attempt wiping the blood away. You've foolishly caused harm to your eyes, and I need to see just how bad it is. Hinata bristled slightly before she gave one more attempt at shoving him away while pulling her face out of his grasp. However, she only succeeded in separating them by a couple of inches before she heard an exasperated sigh. Why should he be the one exasperated? I'm the one who's been abducted and is missing a sibling. She quickly swiped her arm over her face, attempting to remove the blood from her eyes. While she did accomplish her goal, she also smeared the blood across her face and arm. Naruto felt a pang in his chest. Blood did not bother him in his profession, it was a common occurrence, but seeing Hinata's blood and knowing she was in pain disturbed him on another level he didn't wish to examine too closely. Shoving the feeling aside, he knew he had to reassure and calm Hinata, otherwise his attempts at keeping her safe would be for naught, as she would continually attempt to attack him. Stepping away, though he desperately wanted to help remove the blood from her and provide first aid for her eyes, he attempted to speak in as calming a tone as his roughened voice could manage. You're safe, okay? I'm not going to hurt, maim, rape, or kill you. I give you my word. Why should I trust the word of a known assassin? Hinata spat back at him. Where did the little she-devil come from? What happened to the shy, soft-spoken girl I remember? Naruto couldn't understand what could have changed Hinata so greatly over the years, but he had to admit this version of her intrigued him. Clearly you have some issues with me being an assassin, he sarcastically pointed out the obvious. By all means don't hold back, tell me how you really feel. Hinata scowled at the dark blur in front of her that she knew was Ronin, slightly concerned that her vision was still blurred even after she'd wiped away the blood. Before she could respond, the blur paced slightly away from her. Pacing as though he had nothing else of consequence to deal with, Naruto crossed his arms over his chest. Though I must say I'm curious as to what you could possibly have against me. I mean, after all, didn't you used to be a shinobi for Konohagakure? And don't the shinobi of hidden villages perform assassinations for a fee? Oh, but let me guess, it's different when an assassination is carried out by directive of a kage versus what I do, is that it? Hinata was puzzled at the turn of the conversation, but felt he was insulting her intelligence with his sarcasm. If you must know, my issue is not so much that you are an assassin, I could care less about that. It is the fact that you are a man who would kill anyone if the price were right. Shinobi do perform assassinations, on that you are correct. However, those assassinations are only approved by my Hokage if the reasons for it are justified. Your ethics vary depending upon the amount of money offered to you. You are essentially without true morals. Everyone knows of your ruthless ways and how you never leave any survivors. Tell me, how many innocent people have you killed because the fee for the contract was lucrative? How many women? How many children? Naruto's was dumbfounded by her naivety, and his anger boiled over. Hinata was startled when Ronin rushed forward, suddenly forcing her back against the wall. He did not press his body against her as he did when the explosion occurred, instead he maintained several inches of distance between them. You are a naive fool. Do you honestly believe that every mission of assassination designated by your Hokage is a just one? Do you have any idea how many assassinations are performed for money, power, or jealousy? If I leave no survivors, then pray tell, how does everyone know of my exploits? Scoffing at her, he continued, you know nothing of my morals, values, or ethics. You know nothing of me, so do not presume to. Naruto turned away from Hinata, feeling infuriated at her understanding of his character. He truly had no one to blame but himself. He'd set out to become someone different than who he had been in Konoha. Apparently he'd succeeded. Turning back to look at her over his shoulder, he felt the need to set her straight on one matter. I have never killed an innocent man, woman, or child if I could help it, nor have I accepted money for doing so when it was unavoidable. Hinata was troubled with conflicting thoughts and emotions about this man before her. Her thoughts told her that he was a vicious killer who had probably abducted her for ransom or had harmed her sister for the same reasons. Her emotions began to override her logical reasoning in an evaluation of the way this man had rescued her from Goru and Daichi, cared for her wounded shoulder, then returned her to her family. Not to mention the fact that he had appeared to be shielding her from the repercussion of the explosion earlier in the hall. He'd obviously cared about what was wrong with her eyes upon entering the room, and despite her hostility towards him, he had not lashed out at her once. Hinata quickly realized she'd leaped to conclusions about this man based on a reputation he'd garnered. She knew better than anyone how easily a story could be embellished when passed from one person to another. Stepping forward despite her poor ability to see him, she held out a hand as though to stop him. Speaking in a low, shame-filled voice, I am sorry, you are right, I made some harsh assumptions about your character. If you are not going to harm me in any way, then may I ask why you've abducted me and what has been done with my sister? Naruto halted halfway out the door with his hand gripping the knob. Taking a deep breath, he attempted to diffuse his temper. He needed to understand that Hinata had been through a lot recently with 2 attacks upon her person, and now with her sister involved it made sense that she'd be a bit hostile and untrusting. He turned towards her. Your sister is safe. In fact, she may be on her way back to Konoha with your cousin and other clan members as an escort any minute. Now I'm going to get you a change of clothes. I don't know how poor your vision is right now, but you're covered in debris from the explosion and blood from your eyes, which have finally stopped bleeding. You may want to clean up, then we'll check the severity of the damage to your eyes and I will explain the situation to you as best I can. Hinata nodded slowly, acknowledging that she would indeed like that. So far she was lost in trying to sort it all out on her own. She honestly couldn't guess why Ronin was in Sunagakure. She hoped that he was correct in his assumption that Hanabi was safe and on her way back to the ensured safety found within the walls of Konoha and their clan compound. She admittedly wasn't too concerned about her eyes. She knew through her training that the blurriness would eventually fade as she rested her eyes. He left the room and quickly returned with what she assumed would be a change of clothes, since at the moment it appeared to be a cloth-shaped blur. She reached out hoping to keep him from invading her personal space, something that seemed to happen on a regular basis with this guy. He gripped her forearm with one hand and placed the ties to what felt like a sack in her outstretched hand with the other. Naruto was about to leave the room again when he realized she might need some help removing the blood if her vision was poor. Thankful for the mask covering his face to hide his blush, he turned back to her and asked, "Do you need help getting cleaned up? The blood, I mean, do you need help removing the blood from your face?" An image of her standing in the shower washing off flashed in his mind, causing his body to harden. He couldn't determine if more of his blood had moved to his face or to a lower part of his anatomy. Hinata blushed at the thought of him helping her wash off and with a coy smile replied, "Thank you, but I think I'll manage on my own." Naruto felt like he dodged a bullet with that one, and he just managed to stop from reaching up to rub the back of his head. "Right, okay, just call out if you do need help. I have to get out of this room before I embarrass myself anymore or do something I know I'll regret later." As the door closed, Hinata reached down to loosen the ties on the sack, wondering whose clothes she'd be wearing this time. Inside the sack were a set of shinobi pants, a camisole, and a soft hooded jacket. She frowned in confusion as the material and size of the jacket felt the same as one of her jackets. Did he take these clothes from my room? Though she was no longer a shinobi, she had always been most comfortable dressed as one, and while within Sunagakure arranging the terms for her marriage, she wasn't allowed to dress as she wished. "Father thinks it would be improper for me to appear as anything less than the high-born lady I am." Well-constructed dresses that preserve her modesty and kimonos were her only wardrobe choices when outside of her suite. So she was pleased that the clothes Ronin had chosen to give her would keep her comfortable. Now she just needed to make her way to the bathroom and into the shower without killing herself. Naruto had been pacing the outer room of the suite attempting to sort out the situation. So far he knew that Hinata's life was at risk. She was getting married in 5 days, and he had to figure out how to keep her safe while not revealing his identity or sexually assaulting her. Needless to say, his stress level was at an all-time high. He heard the shower in the other room turn on, and groaned at the image of her standing naked under the water as it sluiced down her body, caressing her skin. Opening his eyes and shaking his head as though to dispel the image, he moved against the far wall of the suite to sit cross-legged on the floor. Before leaving Konoha, he hadn't been known for his patience, but he'd since taught himself to find calm and patience in even the most trying of moments. He struggled to do the same now as he forced himself into a meditative state. He just managed to find his inner calm, or coldness as Takashi would label it, when he heard the water shut off and prepared for the conversation to come. Feeling better, more revived and calm, Hinata took a deep breath, then squared her shoulders as she stepped out into the main room of the suite. He looked up at the sound of her door opening. "How are your eyes?" Thankfully her eyes had begun to recuperate as her vision was only slightly blurred around the edges now. She saw Ronin standing with his arms crossed over his chest. "They are better, thank you. I am able to see with only a slight blur. I expect they'll continue to get better as time goes by." She then decided to dive right into her main concerns. "What are you doing in Suna?" His eyes crinkled in what she had to guess were a smile. "Not going to beat around the bush, are you?" Before she could speak, he waved her comments away. "You might want to take a seat. Takashi and I are here to protect you. Your father requested our services as your personal guard." Naruto chose not to tell her about the fact that they declined that request initially. It was a nuance that didn't require her attention. "Okay," she urged him on. Continuing, he stated, "Currently there is a contract out on you and the collection of your eyes. Takashi and I discovered when we were approached with the job of handing over your eyes to someone who wishes to collect on the contract." Hinata tensed at this information. "So which job are you truly here to perform, my protection or my death?" He sighed heavily. "I understand your mistrust, but I assure you neither myself nor Takashi are here to harm you. Or your sister," he added as an afterthought. "I've moved you to this room to keep you close to your father during the preparation for your wedding. Naruto was proud of himself for not breaking his teeth as he clenched them while making that last statement. We are going to try keeping your exact location a secret from those who may be assisting in these attacks on you. Hinata nodded, understanding the reasoning behind that decision. And my sister? If someone is targeting you for your eyes and cannot reach you, it is a logical assumption that your sister, the only other available unsealed Hyuga, would then become a target. You make an excellent point. Thank you for your protection of me and my sister. Now what do we do? He was surprised at how well she's taking everything. He remembered Hinata had been a calm and logical female before he'd left Konoha, so he supposed her acceptance of the situation shouldn't be too surprising. Your father and the elders' council of your clan believe that the danger to you will cease once you are wed. So for now we keep you safe until then and try to figure out who has directed these last few attacks on you. Realization dawned on her. You want to use me as bait to lure out this mysterious person, she stated rather than questioned. There has always been a threat against you and any other unsealed member of your clan in a bid to gain the Byakugan. These sudden attacks on you are suspicious. The fact that someone is attempting to hire out for the ability to collect on the contract raises many red flags. I believe that is where we should focus our attention to ensure your safety even after you are wed. So yes, I do intend to use you as bait, as you put it. She nodded. Alright, then you have my full cooperation. Hanabi Hyuga's eyes popped open, her Kekkai Genkai silently activated, as soon as she heard the door to the room close. Looking in the direction of the room door, she saw no one. There was no sign of the man she knew had to be walking down the hall. It must be a seal either on me or him to render the Byakugan useless. Clever. She had been prepared when the man had wrapped his forearm around her throat, knowing that he'd either intended to apply a choke or blood hold to her. Clearly he'd meant to use a blood hold, as the pressure he applied was to the carotid artery at the side of her neck rather than upon her larynx. She had struggled slightly when the pressure had been applied, but pretended to quickly succumb to keep herself from truly being rendered unconscious. Many openings for attack had been identified when the man was standing before her, and even when he believed she was at his mercy. However, she had been taught to strike at the right time, and she deemed attacking before gathering more information on the situation and her sister's location was not the right time. Leaping from the bed, she paced the room, checking for anything that could provide more information. She remembered seeing a masked man behind Hinata after the explosion had thrown that man into her. Could that have been Ronin? What is he doing here? Too many thoughts raced around in her head, questions of whether the explosion was a distraction to abduct Hinata or if the man who had saved her sister was now a threat. Going to every window in the room, she tried opening those first, wanting to allow enough time for the stranger to get far enough away before she attempted the door. To her displeasure, none of the windows would open. Dropping her arms in exasperation, she turned a glare on the door, then stomped over and tried to yank it open. Again, the result was not satisfactory, as the door held strong against all of her attempts to open it, just as the windows had done. Her attempts had started out simply with her pushing and or pulling on the windows and door. It didn't take long for her temper to flare as she began trying to bust out the windows by any means necessary, only to move to the door and attempting the same. She'd even grown as desperate as to apply the few jutsus, other than the gentle fist, that she knew to the windows and door in hopes of creating a means of escape. It has to be seals. It would just have to be few in jutsu, she thought, frustrated as she was not skilled in the art of sealing. Dropping down onto the couch in the main seating area of the suite, Hanabi felt fatigued, as though all of her attempts had amounted to full day of training. Rage burns bright and fast, wearing a person down more quickly than physical exertion. She remembered her father's warning as he'd admonished her for being so quick-tempered. Well, what now? She asked the empty room, unsure of what she should do. Quickly looking around as she tried to settle both her mind and roiling emotions, she made a decision. It's time to prep the ground. Home court advantage counts for everything after all. Hanabi rose and began another search for items that could aid in her preparations for any eventuality the next time someone entered the suite. Entering the bathroom, she glanced up at the shower with a wicked grin, then yanked the shower rod off the wall. Leaving the bathroom, she set the rod on the couch. Looking up, she spied a 6-foot-tall floor lamp that she moved closer to the door. Plugging the lamp in and setting it down, she turned towards the small kitchenette of the suite. Chewing her lower lip, she wondered if it was stocked with dishes and cookware. She felt better knowing that she was as prepared as she could be after carefully placing her items in locations that would allow them to be of the most benefit to her. Now all that was left to do was sit and wait for someone to try coming through the door. Hayashi Hyuga had watched his oldest daughter walk out of the meeting with her fiancé, clearly enraged but doing him proud as she gave no outward display of her inner turmoil. Turning back to Nizudamasu, he quirked his head to the side, studying the young man before him who would soon become his daughter's husband. Upon first meeting this young man, he had admired the stoicism he displayed, though as time passed he began to suspect the stoicism was due to a lack of feeling towards Hinata. Unfortunately, this marriage was not something he could choose to back out of and still save face. The image presented by the Hyuga clan must always be above reproach. It simply would not do if this wedding was to be cancelled. If it was, Niza could claim they'd chosen not to go through with the ceremony to avoid revealing that Hinata had indeed lost her virginity. It would not matter if the clan claimed it had been taken from her during her abduction and she'd been a victim. All anyone would see is that the heiress to the Hyuga clan was tarnished. Reaching up to pinch the bridge of his nose, taking a deep breath, he pretended to listen to the menial subject of conversation Nizu was carrying on about, if only to himself. Suddenly there was the sound of an explosion as the foundation of the building shook. Activating his Byakugan, he turned to look toward the hall as he watched the chakra signatures of both daughters disappear. To say Hayashi Hyuga was shocked would be an understatement. He knew his daughters were not dead, as their chakra signatures had been at healthy levels before vanishing. When a person is dying, even a sudden death, the chakra signatures appear as a dying flame, dwindling down to nothing. Opening the door to the meeting room with enough force to have it slam into the wall and bounce back, conveniently hitting Nizu as he followed behind, Hayashi entered the hallway calling for his nephew. He headed in the direction of the suite reserved for both of his daughters, located in the east wing of the inn. The guards I posted between the meeting room and their suite have vanished. Niji Hyuga had quickly fallen in behind his uncle and was worried over his cousins. He too had witnessed them seemingly disappear. In their concern, they did not notice nor care that Niza followed behind them at a more sedate pace. Upon entering the east wing, they quickly noted the area of the blast and the remains of two men. Unconcerned with the dead, they swept past to enter the suite, where it was evident there had been some struggle. What weren't evident were the two Hyuga females or any clues as to where they disappeared to. Niji and Hayashi surveyed the room while Niza stood near the door, a look of shock upon his face as he attempted to control his anger. Another Hyuga branch member entered the room, reporting that the guards had been located unconscious and stuffed in a hall closet back near the meeting room. Apparently the guards had been drugged somehow, and then moved. Niza made a decision upon viewing the room and stormed forward, snarling, "What is this, Hayashi? Some elaborate scheme to get out of the wedding?" Hayashi's head jerked up and his eyes narrowed upon Nizu. Speaking slowly while gritting his back teeth, he responded to the asinine accusation. "Niza-san, even I would not go so far as to drug members of my own clan, destroy a public establishment, risking harm to bystanders and potentially putting my daughters in danger if I did not wish for this wedding to proceed. I suggest you watch your tongue more closely before you make accusations you will regret." Appearing as though Hayashi had struck him, Niza stepped back. "Are you threatening me, Hayashi-sama?" Hayashi turned his back on the foolish man. "I do not deal in threats, Niza-san." He then turned to continue surveying the room and making plans to have the inn and surrounding area searched in hopes of finding a sign as to his daughter's whereabouts. With the attention of the Hyugas upon the room and making their plans, Nizu was able to slip out of the room easily. He'd done his part of playing the concerned fiancé. Now he needed answers. Takashi strode down the north wing after leaving Hanabi Hyuga unconscious in the suite. Heading out a window to make his way to the east wing, he knew that he would not find the head of the Hyuga clan still in the meeting room after the explosion. He had to remember that he was dressed as an ANBU of Suna, so he had to act accordingly by appearing and disappearing through windows, as he'd heard from Naruto that real ANBU tend to do. Quickly sprinting over the roof, he re-entered through a window near the mouth of the east wing. He was surprised to see Hinata's fiancé storming away. Takashi was an inquisitive individual, and knowing that his best friend was attracted to this man's fiancée made him even more curious. Following at a distance, he watched as Niza exited into a strategically placed garden, heading for the back corner, near a large tree. Staying by a window, he watched. This guy does not seem like the nature type. What the hell is he up to? He was surprised and suspicious upon seeing June step out from behind the tree, standing in the shadow of its limbs, as Nizu appeared to be chastising him emphatically. Deciding to relay this new information to Naruto later, Takashi quickly walked away to find Hayashi Hyuga. Standing just outside of his daughter's suite, Hayashi was surprised to see an ANBU of Suna approaching him. Turning to the ANBU, he prayed silently that this man had some information about the location of his daughters. "Hayashi-sama," the man said with a slight bow, "may I speak with you privately?" Hayashi nodded, then gestured for the ANBU to follow him back to the meeting room. He entered the room, allowing the ANBU to shut the door to the hall. However, he was not expecting to turn around to find Ronin's partner standing before him. Eyes widening, he was stopped by the man's upraised hand before he could begin demanding answers. "I understand your concern and worry for your daughters. I am here to inform you both are safe and well. Ronin has changed his mind. The Hyuga heiress will receive his protection until the time of her wedding." Hayashi felt relief rush over him upon hearing this. Nodding quickly, he asked, "When will my daughters be returned?" "They won't," came the reply in a detached tone. "Your eldest daughter has now been attacked twice, and it is only a matter of time before the target shifts to your youngest as well. For now they will stay where they are. We'll be in touch with you soon." Ronin's partner resecured the cloth covering for his ANBU disguise. Hayashi did not want to know how he'd come upon the uniform. As the man turned for the door, he halted the man's progress. What about Hinata's wedding? It is in 5 days. His head cocked slightly to the side, the man's eyes squinted slightly. That is not our concern. As I said, we'll be in touch. He then turned, leaving the room quickly. Hayashi activated his Kekkei Genkai to track his movements and discover his daughter's location, only to realize he could see nothing. So that's how they did it, seals to block the Byakugan. His frustration mounting, he rushed to the door, yanking it open to find an empty hallway before him. Taking a deep sigh, he hoped these two men could be trusted with the lives of his daughters. Takashi had leapt out of another window and proceeded to re-enter the north wing. Geez, all this running around is bad for my health, he thought. He refused to think of the worry he could clearly see in the Hyuga head's eyes. Instead, he worried over the sight of Nizu with June. What the hell have we gotten ourselves into? He needed to share this information with Naruto. Hanabi had prepared the room for just about anything. The shower rod, once collapsed, fit perfectly in the door frame just at the bottom of the door. She'd removed the lamp shade from the floor lamp after placing it close enough, though not too close to the door. She had been pleased to find that the kitchen was indeed stocking with dishes, cookware, and even non-perishable items. The set of kitchen knives strategically hidden on her person would be used as a last resort. She needed to maintain her distance from this man. He managed to block several Juken strikes, so she knew he was faster than her. He had height on his side, as he was quite a few inches taller than her 5'1" stature. Judging from his build, he had strength too. Thankfully, her appropriated tools and their locations would help her overcome all of that, she hoped. The statistics of her assailant meant nothing, for she knew that she could outthink him. After all, she was a Hyuga. That man will regret abducting me. I just hope I can find Hinata once I escape this room. Pacing the room, she chewed her thumbnail, waiting rather impatiently for someone to attempt the door. Takashi headed back towards the north wing. Continuing past the suite, Naruto and Hinata were heading to the end of the wing. He decided to check on the younger Hyuga first. Not sure why, he felt compelled to make sure she was still in the room. He had the utmost faith in the seals Naruto had taught him, but that female seemed like the type capable of escaping the room nonetheless. Halting outside the door, he placed his palm against it, releasing chakra at the same time. A seal was revealed, and he quickly bit his thumb, smearing some of his blood onto the seal. He watched as the seal appeared to glow before fading once again. Deciding to enter as silently as possible, he slowly turned the door and shoved against the door. Pausing when the door stopped after barely opening an inch, he stared at the door, as though it would reveal the reason behind this mystery. Sighing, he knew the girl had to be behind this. Instead of pulling the door closed to try again, he chose to apply more force. Afraid Hanabi was on the other side of the door, he tried not to be too forceful. He didn't want to hurt her, just open the damn door. Again the door stopped. Glancing down with a sigh, he stepped back, then slammed his shoulder into the door. Ouch! How the hell is she keeping this door closed? His third attempt to open the door only succeeded in bruising his shoulder. A more clever or patient man might have determined that if the little witch wanted the door to stay closed, then he'd close and reseal it. At least that way he knew she wasn't getting out. But he needed to make sure she was actually in the room. If she'd found a way to escape, she might have blocked the door to buy more time before her absence was discovered. Rotating his shoulder to relieve the ache, he stepped back, then kicked the door in, wincing at the noise and now broken door frame. Glancing down, he saw what appeared to be a curtain rod jammed into the door frame. A frown upon his face, he began to step over it and sensed movement coming at him fast. Is that a frying pan? He shifted his weight to the left, crouching to avoid the pan trying to smash into his head. Instead, the handle banged his previously unharmed shoulder. The new pain threw him slightly off balance. Before he could right himself or stand, he felt a shock go through him as all of his muscles seemed to cramp up at once. The pain of his muscles seizing was indescribable. He couldn't move except to raise his eyes, finding Hanabi standing several feet away holding a metal rod against him. He barely noticed the floor rising up to meet him, losing consciousness before he impacted with the tile in the foyer of the suite. Wow, that was easier than I thought, she noted. Hanabi tossed the broken lamp down to the floor, surprised that she hadn't needed the flour after all. She hadn't needed the knives either, though she decided to keep those just in case. The curtain rod had been needed to make him pause at the door, giving her time to catch him by surprise. Which she had. She'd flung the frying pan end over end, praying it would hit him. It would serve him right for abducting me. But when he ducked, she'd been prepared for that scenario too, quickly jabbing the bulb of the plugged-in floor lamp into his chest. It had been just enough voltage to cause his muscles to seize and render him unconscious. Stepping gingerly around his prone body, she peeked out the door in case he had backup. Seeing no one else in the hall, she walked in the direction she believed he'd carried her from, trying to remember how far he'd carried her so she could guess which room her sister was in. Stopping in front of a door, she activated her Byakugan, but she saw no one in the room. It was possible the same seal the man was using could be used by Ronin, or even be placed upon Hinata. She turned her head to survey the other rooms, noting that all of them in this wing appeared empty. With a sigh, she slipped one of her acquired knives from the sleeve of her shirt and lightly scratched a tiny X on the wall next to the door. Praying she'd guessed right, she ran to the end of the wing, seeking her father or any other member of her family. "All right then, you have my full cooperation." Naruto was taken aback with that one simple sentence. He hadn't expected her to concede so easily. As far as she was concerned, he was a stranger. Needless to say, he was suspicious of her motives. She'd taken a seat on the edge of a couch in the main sitting area of the suite, while he'd explained the situation to her. Gazing up at him, absolutely resolute to cooperating, she waited for him to say something more. Though she had to admit the silence wasn't uncomfortable, just slightly awkward. As his gaze seemed to stray off, she wondered what could have distracted him. Naruto stood silently pondering the woman before him. Comparing her to the girl he'd known, naturally there were similarities, but he could see she'd gained some confidence over the years. 8.5 years ago. On a random day, Naruto decided to get in some extra training. He had awoken earlier than usual. The sun was barely providing any light as he made his way to one of the many training grounds within the village. Stumbling out of the trees, it took some time for him to realize that the training ground was already occupied. Blinking his eyes open as though he had only just woken up, he halted mid-step, his jaw falling open. There, standing at the top of a slightly inclining hill, was Hinata Hyuga. He watched as she moved gracefully through what he could only guess were the stances of her family's renowned fighting technique. He wanted to get a closer look as he was enthralled by the sight of the sun's rise into the sky, highlighting the fluidity of her movements. Stepping lightly into the tree line to his left, he circled around the field to get a closer view, never taking his eyes off the girl for very long. "Why am I hiding like this? It's just Hinata." He couldn't understand why he felt the urge to observe his comrade in secrecy. He only knew that some unnamed desire had him acting like some weirdo stalker. Perhaps because any time he approached Hinata she seemed so odd, often passing out. How does she complete missions while randomly fainting all the time? He took advantage of the fact that she was unaware of his presence, silently thanking Kami that she wasn't using her Kekkai Genkai during this training. Though the sun was barely lighting the sky, he could tell from Hinata's haggard appearance that she had been at this training session for a while. Dragging his eyes away from the enchanting image she presented in the morning light, he surveyed the training ground. He found shallow craters where she'd performed her family's defensive palm rotation, Kaiten. There was a wooden training dummy further away that appeared to have taken quite a bit of damage. This puzzled him, as he knew the gentle fist fighting technique wasn't about force but precision to hit specific points within one's chakra network. He wondered if she was trying a different fighting style, developing a new jutsu, or if something was bothering her. Hearing a feminine gasp, his gaze quickly returned to Hinata, only to wince in embarrassment, his face flushing as he realized she had finally decided to use her Byakugan. She was now looking right at him, hiding amongst the trees. Her face pinched slightly in confusion as her own cheeks flamed pink. "Na Naruto-kun?" She spoke so quietly that he only knew she'd called his name by reading her lips. "Well, the jig is up." He walked out of the trees, rubbing the back of his head with a big grin on his face to hide his own embarrassment. "Hi, Hinata. Sorry, I didn't mean to spy. I was actually coming to do some early training myself. But I didn't want to disturb you." "Oh," Hinata gushed, looking down and away, bringing a closed fist to her mouth. That's alright, na Naruto-kun." Naruto paid little attention to her shyness or discomfort. He was too distracted by the glow surrounding her as the sun rose over the tree line behind her. Wow, Hinata looks kind of beautiful like this. It felt so weird for him to think such a thing about anyone other than his Sakura-chan, but he could think of no other word to describe the image before him. Hinata felt her face heat even more, wondering why Naruto was just staring at her. "Well, should probably get back to the compound, be by Naruto-kun." With her head down, she began to move past him, only to be stopped when his hand lightly grazed her arm. Looking up with curiosity, fear and nervousness, she asked, "Why yes, Naruto-kun?" A big beaming smile upon his face, Naruto felt he just had to tell her, "Hinata, I have to say, just watching you train, you were really impressive. It's clear all this training is paying off." His smile fading to a look of concern, he cautioned, "But I think you shouldn't be out here alone before the sun is up. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you." He cringed slightly after saying that, knowing that if he'd made that typically male comment to one of the more independent kunoichi like Sakura or Ino, he'd regret it. But Hinata's face turned a bright red as she swayed a little on her feet. A look of concern crossed his face. "Hinata, are you okay?" Hinata felt all the blood in her body relocate to her face as Naruto expressed concern for her well-being. She even began to feel dizzy as the edges of her vision went a bit blurry. As he asked if she was okay, Hinata forced her lungs to drag in necessary oxygen. Come on, Hinata, at least attempt to act normal. He's right in front of you, don't blow it again by passing out. Sparing him a weak smile, she responded, I am fine, Naruto-kun, thank you for your concern. No problem, Hinata, Naruto responded with his usual level of enthusiasm. She turned once again to leave, but something was bothering Naruto, so he stopped her once again. It appeared Hinata had been out here for a long time before the sun began to rise, so he felt the friendly thing to do was make sure there wasn't anything bothering her. Hey Hinata, did something upset you, sending you out here so late last night? You can talk to me about it, if you want. He turned his head down, feeling awkward after offering to lend his ear to her troubles. Hinata felt stunned. Perhaps her sweet Naruto-kun wasn't quite as oblivious as everyone assumed. She actually felt tempted to unload the burden weighing her mind upon his shoulders. Naruto's entire personality seemed to scream that he could and would take on any challenge. It would be wonderful to have him there to help with her challenges, but she knew he had plenty of his own worries. I just couldn't sleep. She smiled at Naruto. Oh, okay. Hinata, if you want to train late at night again, I won't mind coming with you, so feel free to ask, okay? Naruto spared the young girl another grin. He's worried about me. Oh, someone pinch me now. No, don't. I refuse to wake up if this is all some wonderful fantasy. Again feeling on the verge of fainting, Hinata could only hide a smile behind her hand. Okay, Naruto-kun. Before she could say any more, Ko rushed from the trees. There you are, Hinata-sama. I've been searching for you for hours. Please, you must return to the compound with me. Your father is concerned over your absence. The young man spoke in a breathless rush, trying to instill urgency while catching his breath. Hi, Ko-san. Hinata turned back to Naruto. Thank you again, Naruto-kun, for your concern, but I must go now. I bid you well in your own training. She quickly approached Ko, and the two leapt into the trees to presumably return to Hyuga compound. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle a little at the softness of her voice and the formality she displayed once Ko had arrived. I really hope she doesn't keep coming out here to train so late by herself, he thought ruefully. Present. Naruto hadn't thought of that brief moment in all these years. Honestly, the memory had taken him by surprise. She really had been beautiful that morning with the orange and pink rays of dawn gently caressing her skin. Geez, now I sound like a woman or one of Erosenen's trashy novels. Looking back on it now, he was aware of just how shy and awkward Hinata had been. As a grown man with some experience, he realized now the possible reasons behind her constantly flushing face, the stutter and fainting. He smiled slightly behind his mask, before his focus was dragged back to the present by the woman before him. Finally deciding to break the ever-increasing tension, Hinata glanced away slightly. So what do we do now? So many thoughts, memories and questions had been rolling through his mind at that moment. He mentally shook himself before crossing his arms over his chest. Looking out the window at the fading light of day, he responded, Well, now we can get you something to eat, I suppose. Hinata tilted her head to the side, looking at him like he'd grown a second head. Well, that wasn't what I was expecting you to say. She watched his eyes squint slightly in what appeared to be a smile. What can I say? I tend to be a bit unpredictable. His comment, though innocent, caused a frown to appear upon her face for a half-second before she decided to follow his example. Jumping to her feet, she attempted to display some enthusiasm. All right, what does a famed assassin feed an abducted person he's protecting? He snorted in amusement, shaking his head slightly. He turned, heading towards the kitchenette in the suite. That depends on what is in the kitchen. Scrunching her nose, she paused, following him. Oh, these things usually aren't stocked with supplies until right before a guest arrives. So there probably isn't anything available. He merely looked her way, quirking an eyebrow before he proceeded to open the refrigerator, clearly displaying its many contents. Hinata's eyes bulged. Wah? How did you get so much food in here? Ronin shrugged while holding the refrigerator door open. We assassins have our ways. So what will it be? Her stomach chose that moment to growl slightly, causing her face to flush an attractive light pink. Her eyes seemed to glance everywhere but at him as he couldn't help but chuckle over her embarrassment. Hinata's eyes finally snapped to him as he let out a chuckle. It was odd to see a man who appeared so cold and distant chuckling. However, before either one could comment further, they heard a distant boom. Both turned towards the door as Ronin quickly closed the refrigerator, then approached her. Gripping her upper arm lightly, he ushered her back towards the bedroom. I need you to go in the bathroom, get in the tub and stay down. Halting halfway across the sitting room, Hinata felt outraged. What? No, I'm perfectly capable of defending myself. Yeah, and we've seen the evidence of that with your last abduction, I was drugged while sleeping. I wasn't exactly given the chance to fight back. Giving her a look of disbelief, he spoke with an acerbic tone. Really, are you making excuses now? Sleeping is one of the worst things you can do when being hunted. Well, excuse me, Mr. Trained Assassin, but I wasn't aware I was being hunted. Ronan continued tugging on her arm in an effort to at least get her into the bedroom for cover. Look, be a sweetie. Get in there before someone barges in here to kill us both. He gave a final hard tug on her arm, sending her off balance into the room before he slammed the door shut in her face. Acting quickly, he placed a seal upon it to keep her in as he heard the sound of a light scratching outside the door. He took a stance, bracing his feet apart, several feet away and to the right of the door. He waited for someone to barge in and waited. Hinata tried everything she could think of to open the bedroom door. She finally resigned herself to simply banging on it and shouting vulgar insults at him. While Naruto stood waiting, he felt some amusement listening to Hinata insult him. When did the soft-spoken, shy girl learn to talk like that? After minutes that seemed like hours of waiting for an attack, the doorknob began to turn. As it swung open, he rushed forward, unsheathing his ninjato prepared to kill. He stopped short at the sight of Takashi stumbling into the room looking severely disheveled. His friend stood before him with the head wrap of a Sungakure Anbu Askew upon his head. The cloth that was supposed to hide his face was missing. Naruto's voice became a low rumble as he eyed Takashi's appearance. What happened? Takashi hadn't even been surprised or worried upon seeing Naruto rush him. It was expected. He'd forgotten to knock, but who could blame him with mini seizures still occurring throughout his body? All thanks to the not-so-nice electrical shock that damn Hyuga had given him. What do you think happened? The little brat arranged a welcome-back party for me after I reported to her father. She threw a frying pan at me, a frying pan. Then she electrocuted me with a floor lamp, a freaking floor lamp. Naruto tried to contain his amusement over Takashi's situation, but he just couldn't as a full-bellied laugh seemed to burst out of him. He received death glares from a hunched-over Takashi as he leaned on the door frame. Oh, you think that's funny? Well, here's one you'll find hilarious. She escaped. Naruto's laughter froze in his throat. What? Yeah, you heard me right. She escaped. Naruto stepped out into the hall, checking the walls around the doorframe as something occurred to him. Storming back into the room, he began collecting the packs he'd prepared for himself and Hinata. She marked the room. We have to leave. Looking around with his hands out to his sides, Takashi was incredulous. And where do we go? This is where we always hole up while in this village. Unless you got another hideout somewhere that I've been unaware of all these years, we have nowhere to go. Shooting daggers at his young friend, Naruto chose not to respond. He knew where they were going, he just didn't want to go there. It would move them further away from the Hyuga clan and risk exposure during the transport. Hanabi was sure to report their location to Hayashi. While the man may be on their side, Naruto wasn't going to take any chances. All of the attacks on Hinata had been too convenient, too easy. There had to be someone helping her assailants. He hated leaving the room. It was one of his favorite places to unwind while in Suna. No one ever expected Ronin to be hiding in a high-priced suite of the Hoshiin. Gaara had thought of it. He kept the room rented and stocked with food so Naruto could stay any time he needed to. Now he hated the thought of contacting Gaara to tell him this location was exposed and therefore could never be used again. Unsealing the bedroom door, he swung it open, but stood back in case Hinata decided to take a page from Hanabi's book and go on the offensive. She stood there in the middle of the room with her arms crossed over her chest. He tried to ignore the way it pushed her up, drawing attention to that part of her body. Time to go, Hyugaheim. He turned away from her, expecting she'd follow. He was irritated with the way the situation had crumbled around him, and was taking it out on her. One could almost say they'd been getting along before. He hated to admit that he'd begun to feel a connection with her, one that reminded him of who he used to be. It was something he couldn't allow with good reason. Halting, he realized she still stood in the middle of the room. She hadn't budged one bit. We're leaving. Move it. Yeah, I know what's going on. I can hear you know. But that's no reason for you to turn into an. He was a bit taken aback. No one ever argued with him except for Takashi. While he was impressed and mildly amused by her tenacity, they really didn't have time for this. Rather than devote the time to argue, apologize, or anything else she expected, he shifted the two small packs to one hand and walked up to her, offering a black piece of cloth. Only Hinata's eyes lowered to the piece of cloth he held out to her. What is that? He wondered if she could fill that simple inquiry with any more disdain. It's a mask. We can't risk anyone recognizing you while we're escaping. His eyes roamed over her from head to toe, taking in her appearance. You should probably pull your hair up too, and if you can manage it, a henge on your eyes. His manner was so abrupt that Hinata found herself taking the mask from him before she prepared to argue again. Ronan cut her off with a sharp hand gesture. You said I'd have your full cooperation. Were you lying? If not, prove it now. Your hesitation is risking your own life. Taking a deep, calming breath, she slipped the mask on over her head. She noted that it was exactly like his, covering her face from the bridge of her nose down. Using a piece of ribbon he tore from the comforter on the bed, she secured her hair into a ponytail. She glanced at him, waiting for his approval. He gave a sharp nod, then lightly gripped her upper arm again to guide her into the sitting room. She was really becoming irritated with his high-handed methods. Typically, decorum would dictate that she simply oblige him. This was not one of those situations. She chose to oblige him anyway, as she understood the urgency of escaping the room. But once they were settled somewhere else, she would no longer tolerate his manner. They crossed the sitting room to Ronan's friend as he sat slumped against the bar that separated the kitchenette from the sitting room. He definitely looks a bit worse for wear. While Hanabi did a great job on him. She felt a rush of pride that her little sister had knocked this arrogant young man down a peg. Now if only I could do the same to his friend. Pausing mid-thought, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of one of the windows. Earlier, when Ronan had produced clothes for her, she had assumed they were her own. They had fit just right and felt as though they were made of the same material. But as her eyesight had improved, she realized that while the cut and the fabric were similar, the color was definitely not. The clothes he'd given her were dark black. Looking at her reflection in them with a mask covering her face and her hair pulled up for a change, she truly didn't recognize herself. Of course, that was the point, to avoid being recognized, but the differences were astounding. At least until she actually saw her eyes, they were a dead giveaway to her identity. Closing them, she used the necessary hand seal to perform the transformation jutsu, but only on her eyes. When she opened them again to look upon her reflection, her eyes were now a light blue. She scrunched her face slightly, noticing that with the mask on, all one could see was the area between her eyebrows becoming very wrinkly. Not an attractive look for me. Turning away from the window, she looked to the two assassins. Well? She held her arms loosely out to her sides while waiting for some response. Ronan's gaze traveled over her before he turned away completely to close the still open door of the suite. She watched him move towards the window on the opposite end of the sitting room before she angled herself so both men were within her periphery. Takeshi was the only one to voice an opinion. Not bad, you could almost pass as one of us. Scoffing at him, I do not take that as a compliment. Enough, let's get out of here, Ronan growled while standing before the open window. Azetsu, you certainly took your time in returning. The man awaiting his return stood leaning against the table, his arms and feet crossed. Zetsu had only just phased through the floor of the cave they deemed their base of operations. He long since stopped questioning how the man before him could sense his approach. Lowering his head in a nod of respect towards the man wearing the orange mask with a swirl upon it, he stepped further into the room. Gazing into the soul red eye revealed by the mask, he reported his findings. Toby appeared as a statue while listening to the information his subordinate had gained on their target. Very good, Zetsu. Where is Ronan now? Suna, the white half of Zetsu, responded. Interesting, so he intends to protect the Hyuga? It would appear so, though the motive behind such action is suspicious. He has cared little for human life other than his partner. Why would he care about the female? The black half of Zetsu spoke. Toby smiled evilly behind his mask. I have my suspicions. What of your other task? Have you learned anything on the whereabouts of the Jinchuriki? Clearing his throat roughly in nervousness, the white half of Zetsu responded, No, I have not. His disappearance was flawlessly executed, as even I cannot find him. Zetsu was surprised to hear a low chuckle coming from Toby. Cocking his head to the side slightly, the black half of Zetsu quickly came to a realization. You believe Ronan is the Jinchuriki, don't you? Toby applauded Zetsu mockingly. Very good, you've finally caught on. I wondered how long it would take you. Yes, I have my suspicions that he has merely taken on the identity of Ronan. The black half of Zetsu was curious. What makes you so suspicious? Toby's eye narrowed as his tone became sardonic. Let's see, Naruto Uzumaki disappeared from his village at the age of 13. Then we begin to hear rumblings of a masked assassin of young age with blonde hair and blue eyes. This assassin appears to be near the age the Jinchuriki would be, not to mention the fact that all of his jutsus possess a power unlike any other. Oh, let's not forget the fact that all of his targets have been either A or S ranked, and none have escaped him, a feat one shouldn't bat an eye at. Do you believe Konoha created the identity of Ronan to keep him hidden while still getting missions completed? That I cannot say, though it would be a bold move on the part of Tsunade, would it not? If that is not the case, then the reasons for the identity shift are rather confusing. White Setsu was still confused, but why? Why would he run from his village only to create a more renowned identity for himself? Toby shrugged. It matters not to me. We need to determine if my suspicions are accurate. You will return and continue to watch him. And if he is not the Jinchuriki? Then we recruit him. Either way is advantageous to our goals. If he is not the Jinchuriki, then we will put him to use in locating the one we seek, as well as the others. Setsu nodded. Very well. He phased through the floor to carry out Toby's instructions. Toby stood there contemplating the possible scenarios if Ronin turned out to be the missing host of the nine-tailed beast, and if he was not. Either way, plans would need to be made to deal with the man. Perhaps the Hyuga would become useful after all. Hanabi had been rushing to locate her father when she'd rounded a corner and slammed into someone. Reacting instinctively, she'd stepped back into a fighting stance, slipping her hand into her sleeve to grip the handle of a kitchen knife she'd procured. Halting her attack when she realized the person she'd run into was Hinata's fiancé. Releasing her grip on the knife and straightening to stand, she chose not to waste any time mincing words. She chose to ignore the look of surprise followed by something she couldn't quite name as they flashed quickly across his face. Nizu, where is my father? I think I know where Hinata is. His face finally seemed to have settled on the usual aloofness she'd become familiar with. Hanabi-san, we thought the worst. Are you all right? Waving his concern aside, there is no time. Where is my father? She started to move past him, not noticing how his jaw clenched or the look of hatred that flashed in his eyes. Yes, of course. Time is of the essence. Last I saw him, he was in the suite you shared with Hinata-chan. Hanabi gave a sharp nod before rushing towards the suite located in another wing of the inn. Hearing the dulcet tones of her father speaking to Niji, she slowed to a fast walk. Approaching as rapidly as possible, she spotted him standing just outside of the meeting room reserved for the Hyuga clan. Hayashi turned, his eyes wide with shock at the sight of his youngest daughter rushing towards him. He approached her, anxious to assure himself that she was all right. Gripping both her forearms, he demanded she tell him everything that had occurred. The retelling of events took little time since Hanabi boiled it all down to only the most important details. At least the ones she thought most important. Hayashi needed to explain the true situation to his youngest daughter. It was clear she didn't have all of the details and believed Ronin to be an enemy. Come, he said, ushering her to his suite so he could fill her in on the information she lacked. Hanabi jerked away from her father. Otosan, did you not hear me? Hayashi shook his head. There is more to this than you know, Muzum. He continued towards his suite, leaving a confused Hanabi to stand in the hall with her mouth agape. She could not understand why he seemed so unconcerned. What could he possibly have to tell me more important than locating Hinata right away? Hanabi then made a choice. No! She snarled before spinning on her heel and racing back to the room she'd marked. Hayashi turned in utter shock at his daughter's vehement refusal. As she raced off, he did the only thing he could think of, follow her. He ordered his nephew. He rushed behind his cousin, not hoping to stop her but to assist in any way he could. Despite knowing Ronin meant Hinata no harm, Niji was still uncomfortable with the turn of events. He would feel better if she was placed under his direct protection, then he would not leave her side. Watching Hanabi turn a corner, he thought, I won't leave either of them. He watched Hanabi come to an abrupt halt in front of one of the suite doors in the north wing. So close? They'd been so close, and we have men searching the entire village. 5 minutes earlier. Naruto's gaze traveled over her. He felt bereft at the sight of the light blue eyes replacing pale lavender-tinged ones. Seeing her in the all-black outfit caused a clenching in his stomach. He felt himself harden with the memory of the glimpses of her naked body he'd seen at the stream and while bandaging her shoulder. The fact that the outfit completely covered her body did little to dissuade his body's reaction. It only made him more tempted to watch her peel each layer away. Shaking his head, forcing himself to focus on the objective, he turned away completely to close the still open door of the suite. Moving towards the window on the opposite end of the sitting room, he noted the way she angled herself so both he and Takashi were within her periphery. The corner of his mouth twitched in a desire to smile with pride at the training clearly ingrained in her. It was a desire he suppressed immediately. Takashi, of course, had an opinion to share. Not bad, you could almost pass as one of us. Naruto could hear the exhaustion in his friend's voice and knew they didn't have long before it caught up to him. They needed to move fast before everything went to shit around them. On the edge of his attention, he heard Hinata scoff at Takashi. I do not take that as a compliment. Enough, let's get out of here, he growled, interrupting the retort he knew his friend would have. Standing before the open window, he gestured for both of them to precede him out of it. He held up his hand, stopping Hinata when she approached first. Indicating with a nod that he wanted a weary Takashi to exit first to survey the area, he watched as she closed her eyes for a second before opening them with a nod. Takashi lumbered out of the window. Luckily they were on the ground level, and went to scout ahead. Naruto waited to see the hand signal for all clear before gesturing for Hinata to follow. He was surprised at how quiet she was being now. Though he had to admit everything about her surprised him now. He felt as though he stood upon uneven ground and couldn't quite foot a stable footing in her presence. He watched her go through the window, crouching low once outside and activating her Byakugan to scan for others in the area. He felt the need to smack his forehead for not requesting that of her before sending Takashi out the window. The seals placed on all of them would prevent her from seeing their chakra signatures, and she would know if anyone else but her sister were approaching. He was so used to relying on only his and Takashi's abilities that he'd forgotten to consider hers. She released her Kekkai Genkai and nodded to him, indicating an all clear as well before moving to catch up to Takashi. She did that as if we were a team, with no qualms about working together. Forcibly rousing himself from his thoughts, he scanned the room, making sure they left no trace of their presence. Moving into the bedroom then the bathroom, he found her discarded clothes, neatly folded, resting on the counter. Scooping them up, he stuffed them into his pack, before moving back to the window in the sitting room. Jumping nimbly out of it, he quickly caught up to the other two and took over the lead position. He glanced to his left, and knew he needed to send a message covering his ass for where they were going. Hinata had felt argumentative while in the suite, not a feeling she was accustomed to. Well, not when I give free rein to. She was shocked that she'd stood her ground in such a way. Being argumentative internally was nothing new to her, but voicing them was. Too many years of decorum and civility had been instilled into her to allow such thoughts to be vocalized, normally. It appeared as though all of those years were being swept away in light of present situation. She'd grown quiet once she realized her snarky attitude was not going to help the situation. She needed to trust these two men, as hard as that may be to do, but she also needed to work with them. Admittedly, she'd felt a bit insulted that he hadn't asked her to scout the area, but she shrugged it off and proceeded to do so anyway. She released the henge on her eyes so she could focus her chakra into using them. The widening of his eyes as he realized what she was doing was satisfying. She'd silently told him that she was capable of being helpful in this endeavor to remain hidden. As they ran away from the Hoshiin, she looked to her left, surprised to see how close the spherical-shaped building where the Kazekage resided was. Not a hard feat for any location within the village, as the Kazekage Tower was located at the center of it. Though she noted they did appear to be heading in its direction. She knew her father would be bothering Garasama soon to aid in the search for her. She felt sorry that she couldn't alleviate their worry and trouble in some way. They slunk around buildings, hiding in the shadows to traverse the village. As they passed close to the tower, she used her eyes to tell them when it was clear to move. The henge to her eyes would have to remain unused. Thankfully it wouldn't matter, as they were moving in the full dark of night. It would be near impossible for anyone to notice her eyes, not to mention the fact that they made sure to avoid people during their trek. It wasn't long before Ronin signaled for them to wait against the wall of a home while he ran ahead out of sight. She watched Takashi lean on the wall for support as he tilted his head back and closed his eyes, breathing heavily while they waited. He'd been lagging behind her and Ronin as he took the rear guard position. Clearly her sister had taken a lot out of him in her attempt to escape. Hinata begrudgingly felt sorry for him as she worried if he'd be alright.